Welcome to Dr. Creepin's dungeon. Well, it is said that there is no species so cruel as humans that would conduct experiments on themselves. Something we will see in tonight's 2 feature-length stories. Now, my dear friends, as ever, before we begin, a word of caution. Tonight's stories may contain strong language, as well as descriptions of violence and horrific imagery. If that sounds like your kind of thing, then let's begin.
The Polaris Experiment. Funerals used to bother me, but not much anymore. It's difficult to have any sort of apprehension for death when it's practically what I experienced for the better half of a year. I was in a coma, but not like the kind you might be familiar with. It was a dreamless and numbing state of dread that I couldn't escape. One caused by forces beyond my understanding. Evil, ethereal behavior that I can hardly even properly describe. I can't focus on the memories of that void for too long, or else I feel myself slipping backwards into an endless, sinking pit. It makes my whole body become paralyzed with a sense of dread and apprehension toward everyone and everything. Then, just as it becomes overwhelming, there's a gentle tug, and I look and see my sister's calming eyes. Honestly, if it wasn't for Jessie, I'm not sure I'd be around at all anymore. This entire experience was the closest to traumatic that I can think of. It resulted in the loss of my sister's arm. She sacrificed that much for me to save me from hell. Madness and unholy nightmares are something that we've become burdened with ever since we stepped foot into the Thurston Manor over a year ago. And now, as a result, we might be fighting something far, far worse. In these somber moments, as the casket is brought to the front of the small chapel, I can't help but to reflect back on the months that led to this horrible end. It was only a few days after I awoke from my coma that I was still recovering in the Olaf Rehabilitation Center that the debacle started to form. A mysterious representative of an even more shadowy organization known as the Janus Project came to see me. Already Stephen Lang had convinced Jesse that we needed to help him in his group's grand effort to fight otherworldly evil while I was in my coma. But now, he was looking to do the same for me. He came into my room carrying a portfolio filled with grainy pictures and placed them counterclockwise on my tray to show. They were of men and women that looked as though they'd all seen their fair share of hell. Most of them had a state of shock written all over their features, or perhaps one of despair and panic. None of them had any colour to their faces or body. What life they had been drained from them without remorse. "What is this?" I asked Lang as I instinctively looked away from the grisly images. "I understand you might not be ready for this, but this is the reality we are facing. All of these people are victims of the mirror devil I have spoken of at length with your sister about. This is just a sample of his latest prizes. You must focus, Danielle. Do you recognize any of their faces?" he asked me. "What do you mean by that?" "You know as well as I do, the sleepless state you experienced for the past 6 months was nothing medical or remotely ordinary. Your body was trapped here, yes, but your spirit was taken elsewhere, to the world of beyond, the dreamlands," the Asian man said evenly, watching my reaction to his words. I did my best not to shiver impulsively. The darkness and fear I could easily taste any time I focused on those memories was all too powerful. "Are you saying these people were taken there as well? Their spirits, I mean," I said, looking at one picture of a young man with dirty blonde hair. His eyes had a gentle appeal to me, stirring me to think about the surreal landscape I'd been trapped in. Then I pushed the picture away and shook my head. "It's no use. It's too hard for me to even try to comprehend those months in my own mind, let alone explain them to someone else. I'm sorry," I said. I was trying my hardest not to let my emotions show to him, but I could tell Lang was frustrated. "I'll come back later," he said. I didn't bother telling him it would be no use. Instead, I peered out of my hospital window toward the dreary gardens of the rehab to the rolling hills of Dunwich County. Just gazing at the green patches of grass and swirling clouds was so intoxicating and therapeutic. I could get lost in those colours so easily. My mind drifted, and I felt like I was in a trance, transported to the high slopes of the Derleth Pass miles away. I was being called there by someone, by some force, a someone from beyond, the force I had escaped from, beckoning me back. I felt a sharp tug at my hand. My vision returned to the hospital, where I found myself standing on the precipice of my own window, my toes dangling off the side as I turned in horror to see that Jessie was desperately working to get me off the ledge. I stumbled down to her and grabbed her shoulders, trying my best not to shudder. I don't know what came over me, I admitted. Her eyes showed concern and worry for me, but also resolve. Leng had sent her there to talk to me. Danny, we're never going to be free of this until we confront it. You know that, she whispered. How can we? It's beyond our comprehension, I insisted as I tried to regain control of my body. My muscles were still spasming from the blackout I just experienced. Stephen wanted me to share with you a suggested treatment we could try, together. Something that could allow us to enhance our natural abilities and hone them, and then use that to help others, she explained as she helped me back to my bed. A treatment? What do you mean? I asked. Several of the hospital staff here at Olaf are former members of the OSET research group from Clear River. They managed to escape whenever the takeover occurred a few years back. Well, anyway, Dr. Kels was working on an experimental treatment known as Polaris. I wouldn't be able to explain it properly, but, from what I understand, it'd allow us to be able to walk in between this world and the one you were trapped in, Jessie explained. That's out of the question, I said immediately. Danny, no, don't even try to rationalize whatever sob story they sold to you. These people want to use us as guinea pigs, nothing more. I was nearly trapped in that nightmare for the rest of my life, Jessica. And now you want to risk going back there with some theoretical experiment? It's not only dangerous, it's fucking stupid. I snapped back at her. My sister lowered her eyes in defeat. But what if Leng is right, and there are others just like you, trapped there in that hell? Don't they deserve a chance to be saved too? She insisted. Trust me when I say they're too far gone. It's not our problem, I insisted. Jessie then looked at me angrily. How would you have felt if I'd said that about you? I looked away toward the window again. Jessica, I'm far gone myself. You just haven't accepted it yet. I knew she was giving me the stink eye, but I didn't give her the chance to stare me down. Instead, I stubbornly looked toward the hills, waiting for her to give up and storm out. When I was alone again, I got back into my bed and let out a weary sigh. She would never understand what I'd gone through, and I couldn't blame her for hating me. I hated myself, to be honest. But I couldn't go back there. I wouldn't. I closed my eyes, letting my weary brain relax as I tried to push aside all the worry and dread in my heart. But the swirling memories of darkness that had been my reality for half a year easily returned during my slumber. I was still in the hospital, in my bed even, but instead of bright, blinding light, I was looking through a peephole of shadows. This was far more vivid than the other terrifying dreams I'd had, and it instantly sent a chill down my spine. My body felt overwhelmed with a coldness that shook me as I stood and walked out of my room. The halls were empty, the darkness seeping from the edges of my vision absolute. Long strings of slime and blackness ebbed in and out of the floor as I heard a distant, soft cry in the night. Jessie? I called out. There was only a wail in response. I began to run, trying to find my sister. The noises were like 100 people languishing together as the shadows grew stronger. I could hardly see my feet in front of me. When I turned the corner, I saw hordes of children in front of me. They were turned away, looking toward another hallway that fell into darkness, endless darkness. I could feel the evil of that place in my soul, and I froze. Then the children came to me. They were without eyes or faces, just mouths filled with shark-like teeth, gnashing and chanting a single name. She comes, Nevaeh, Nevaeh, by blood born, by blood destroyed, she comes. Their senseless words grew louder. I covered my ears to block them out, but instead I only felt it shake my body more. Then, amid the children, I saw Jessica standing there. She was wrapped in a cocoon of red silk, darker than blood. She was being consumed by these hell beasts. Well, instinctively I ran to her, using my bare fingernails to try and tear apart the silky mess. It wasn't long before I noticed that the cocoon was not made of web, but skin. Jessica's skin. I was ripping apart her body. I stood back, looking at my blood-stained hands and then toward my tormented sister. What had I done? Suddenly her eyes opened and she screamed, joining the faceless children in their chant. I covered my ears again, trying to ignore it. Then I was jolted awake by one of the orderlies. They were shaking me, helping me wake up. Pulling my hands away from my head, I saw that I'd been scratching my ears, trying to tear them off. Once I was calm, the orderlies told the staff to contact the nearest physician. A few moments later, I had a visitor. "Danielle, are you all right?" Dr. Kels asked as he checked my hands and my face. I was still trying to grasp all that I'd seen, but I already knew it hadn't been a dream. It was a warning of what would come if I didn't listen to what Jessie had told me. "I need to talk to my sister," I told him, not bothering to explain much else to the older man. He nodded, checking my vitals and then leaving my room to find her. I was still shaking about 30 minutes later when there was a knock on my door. I turned expectantly, but instead of my sister, it was Len. "Where's Jessie? I need to see her," I said. "Calm down, Danielle, please. Tell me what happened," Len insisted. Instantly I knew something was wrong. "Where is she?" I snapped at him. "She's fine. She's in a room just a floor above you," Len answered. A room? And then it hit me and I knew what had happened. "She subjected herself to your experiment, didn't she?" I asked. Len didn't make a response at first, as he walked over to my bed and placed a hand on my shoulder before remarking, "She knew that you wouldn't agree." "Is she hurt?" I asked fearfully. Instead of responding, Len said evenly, "First, tell me what you saw." Part 2. I struggled to open my eyes as I finally regained consciousness. What had happened in the previous 2 hours, I didn't know, but whatever place I'd awoken in, it wasn't my own bed. It was dark, almost too dark to understand my surroundings. The air hung heavy around me, warm and moist beyond reason. Beneath me, the floor felt hot, almost organic, soft and pulsating. Pearls of sweat were forming on my forehead, both from the heat and stress. "Hello?" I tried to call out, but all that emerged from my hoarse throat were mere whispers. Despite the weak sounds I produced, the words echoed bizarrely throughout the darkness. It wasn't the kind of echo one might expect from an empty room, but rather the sounds that could be heard roaming through an endless cave. It was as if the words I'd spoken had been recorded, only to be played back from an old, decaying tape cassette. "Please, is there anyone there?" I asked, a bit louder that time. The same, almost endless echo greeted me. It sent shivers down my spine, an odd sensation in such a warm place. My legs barely functioned, but with enough effort I was finally able to push myself up. The ground felt unsteady beneath my bare feet, producing a sickly, squishy sound with each step I took. The walls, too, were wet to the touch, twitching as I carefully touched them. Still, I had to lean against it to keep myself upright. I tried to think back. but my mind was shattered. Whatever had happened prior to my awakening was a distant memory that could have happened a minute ago, or an entire century. All that remained were mere fragments of information. I remember my sister, the Janus Project, and a hospital. Still, they felt little more than foreign names and senseless information I retained through my trauma. "Danielle!" I tried to call out, desperate for anything familiar to cling on to. In response, I just got a repeating echo. With few other options, I just started to walk. It was slow at first, not only because my legs were atrophied, but because the ground was all too slippery to get a proper grasp. The liquid that covered it was thick and reeked of metal. It was a rotten, albeit familiar stench, but I couldn't accurately place it. The cave went on for miles, an eternity of wandering that never ceased. Step by step, I just kept going, leaning against the wall for support as I ventured further into the darkness. I could just barely make out the cave walls around me, though there were no lights. There was an unnatural source of illumination that guided me through. Then, as I walked, a memory hit me. It was vague, like a whisper that could be extinguished at any moment. "A treatment? What do you mean?" I heard ringing through the darkness. Unlike the other sounds, it didn't echo. It was just a memory, a sentence, and a clue as to what had happened to me. "They are too far gone." I recognized the voice. It was Danielle, my sister, who felt all too far away. There'd always been a certain connection between the two of us, but it felt broken, missing from whatever hellscape I'd been thrown into. "Please, Danielle, I need your help," I begged, knowing she existed only as the voice inside my head. Wherever she was, I just prayed that she was safe. Hours passed, and the narrow cave eventually opened into a massive chamber. It reached so far up into the world above that I couldn't even begin to see its end. There was no sky above, nor stars to guide my way. Still just a cave without any obvious way out. In the distance, miles deep into the chamber, I saw a lighthouse. It emitted a beam of black light that lit the place up against all laws of physics. It wasn't a comfortable sight, but a sickly one that shaped the world around me, creating a place from which there was no escape. "It's not possible," I mumbled to myself. But what was possible, well, it didn't matter. That place, whatever the hell it was, didn't care about the laws of physics. From the ground, I could see streams of black liquid pump up in a pulsatile manner. Drip from the floor, falling up against the scene like rain, defying gravity. Bone fragments and malformed organs stuck out from the walls, partially covered in muscle and fat. And then I was hit with a flash of memories. They called it the Polaris Experiment. There's a world bound to our own, so far out of reach, yet a threat beyond anyone's wildest comprehension. I'd been chosen to undergo treatment, allowing me to cross between these two worlds, to stop whatever darkness that lay within from spreading over to our own reality. But why couldn't I remember? Why had they chosen me? "Gonna have to inject you intrathecally. What that means is that the medication will be directly put into your cerebrospinal fluid. It's the stuff that flows through your brain and spinal canal, protecting your central nervous system and clearing waste," Dr. Keltz said. "Will it hurt?" I asked. He just nodded. This isn't going to be pleasant, but you need to know just how important this work is, not just for us, but for the whole world." The pain still lingered in my mind, but that was the last thing I felt back on Earth. The world I'd left behind was so infinitely far away, replaced by a dimension full of dread. I had entered to help, but I hadn't the faintest clue what the hell I was supposed to do. That's when I saw the first people. They were just remnants of former human beings morphed into the ground. Their skin had been stretched out, pulled across the wet ground like a pale carpet. They squirmed around, trying to reach onto me as I passed by. I could tell they were trying to scream, but with their lungs exposed to the nightmarish world around them, there was no way they could form words. "Help!" one of them mouthed silently. Those with their rib cages almost intact just kept begging to be killed. They weren't even aware of my presence, yet they constantly begged for the sweet relief of death. I inspected a few of them, considering whether or not I should oblige and finally end their lives. That's when I realized that I could recognize their faces. Despite their faces having been mutilated, eyes ripped out and skin torn from their flesh, they seemed all too familiar. I'd seen these faces before. But however much I wanted to help them, something deep inside me told me to stay away, lest I wish to suffer the same fate. "I told you not to do it," I heard Danielle say. Her voice was distant, but it wasn't just a memory. She was present within me, through a bond I'd never been able to understand. Still, I could do nothing save to walk towards the lighthouse in the distance, with its wall made from bones and the foundation of flesh. It was so far away, and with each step towards it, I just kept growing weaker. It was such an inexplicable emotion to be pulled towards an entity that caused me so much pain. The dark light burned my skin, digging its way into my mind, shattering each and every memory I'd ever created. "You're not enough. You'll never survive," I heard Danielle tell me. I couldn't even remember if the memory was real or a broken fragment created by the world I'd walked through. "Shut up," I yelled back, but the words weren't my own. They weren't what I'd wanted to say. I needed to ask for help, but I couldn't. Then the lighthouse started to feel closer, though if the actual distance had changed, I just couldn't tell. I heard my sister laugh at my misery, her voice twisted and broken. She mocked my attempt at helping people. She wanted me to fail, and I hated her for it. "Just leave me alone," I screamed. Then I saw shadows emerge from the base of the lighthouse. Massive, 8-legged creatures with skin that flowed fluently across the darkness. They were mere shadows, spider-like beings running towards me at impossible speeds. Oh, they were so beautiful, at least in that moment. And that's when it snapped that I wasn't willingly following the cursed light before me. I was being controlled by the place itself, by the forces within the darkness. "Don't go there!" Danielle shouted out. Her muffled voice had finally broken through into clarity. "What?" I responded, still in a haze. Suddenly I felt someone pull me away, snatching me out of the grasp of those spider-like creatures. "Don't look at the light," she ordered, as she pulled me away from the lighthouse. At first I resisted, but she was too strong, and my right arm just wouldn't work. The spiders were getting closer, and in the midst of them all I saw a strange silhouette. It looked almost humanoid, but out of proportion, far too large to be a real person. "Navayat," I heard echo through the cave, a meaningless name that held unfathomable power. The silhouette spurted in front of the spiders and grabbed onto Danielle. The simple touch of the shadow was enough to sear her skin, and she let out a whimper in agony. Her pain was enough to rip me out of the trance I'd been unwillingly put into. Suddenly the memories flowed back, and for a moment I was paralyzed with an overabundance of information. "Only you have the power to leave the place. Once you're inside, we can't do anything to help you. That's why it's so important that you keep focused. The true world will twist your mind, play with your feelings, but it's all a ruse to keep you trapped. You need to remember that," Dr. Cal said. And that was all I needed. I turned away from the lighthouse, which shone bright with its disgusting black beam. I grabbed onto Danielle, who was writhing around in agony from the silhouette's touch. "Danielle!" I called out, pulling her away from the silhouette. It retreated without a fight, seeming to let her go for no reason. "We need to get out of here." "Oh, we have to get further away from the lighthouse first," Danielle responded. I put her arm around my shoulder, and together we retreated back towards the cave I'd come from. She'd saved my life, and Now I had to make sure it wasn't all for nothing. The spiders were still getting closer, hundreds if not thousands of them crawling along the grounds, laughing maniacally at our futile attempt to outrun them. But they weren't stopping us. They were just hunting us for game, playing with us as we desperately fought for our lives. They were just a few feet away when a light penetrated the dark world. The spiders faded away and we dove out from the nightmare, returning to the sterile walls of the hospital I'd been admitted to. "Oh my God, you're back," Dr. Kell said. I shot up in bed, stumbling a bit as I tried to push myself up with my missing right arm. Still, my main concern was Danielle, who was nowhere in sight. "Where's my sister?" was the first thing I said. The doctor smiled. "She's fine, just resting after the ordeal. How'd she get wounded?" I don't know. There was a shadow, and spiders. They almost got us," I said. I was a mess and my mind still didn't function properly. All I could think about was the lighthouse I'd seen in the mirror dimension. I knew I had to stay away, but a part of me desperately longed to get back there. I was given food and water, and with the meal I quickly started to recover. By the time day had given way to night, I was ready to visit my sister. She looked tired and had suffered a pretty severe burn to her leg, which was covered in bandages. Still, she seemed happy to see me. "I guess we're even now," she joked. I let out a chuckle. It had been a while since I'd felt safe, but I didn't regret going into that dimension. I knew how important it was, and it made me feel good. "Yeah, thanks for coming after me. I thought I could do it alone, but I was wrong," I admitted, as I felt the guilt build up in my chest. "I told you not to." She stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes fixated on the wall behind me. I turned around to check what she'd seen, but there was nothing there. But her attention still wouldn't budge, and she looked absolutely horrified. "Danielle, what's wrong?" She shook her head in confusion. "Sorry, I just thought I saw something." "What?" "It doesn't matter. It wouldn't have been possible. I just need to rest a bit. We'll talk more tomorrow, okay?" It felt odd, but I decided just to let her sleep. After what I dragged her through, I had no right to bother her. I gave her a complicated, one-armed hug and made my way back to my own room. About halfway there, I heard the distinct sound of someone sobbing. It was coming from just outside the surgical ward. Well, I was torn between ignoring it or checking it out. Maybe a family had lost someone, but the crying didn't sound sad. It sounded horrified, confused even. I slowly walked over and just peeked around the corner. There on the floor sat a surgeon absolutely covered in blood. A trail of it led back into the operating theatre. I let out an audible gasp, which seemed to gain his attention. "I had to do it," he sobbed. "The worms were eating her up from the inside. I had to get him out. I had to. "What happened?" He just sobbed uncontrollably, ignoring my question. Instead, I just decided to follow the trail into the operating room. When I saw what he left behind, I almost threw up instantly. A woman lay in a prep bed, her abdomen split open down the middle and her intestines poured out onto the floor. Blood splats covered the floor, walls, and even ceiling. It looked like there'd been a struggle. She hadn't even been sedated. And then I saw it, hanging in one of the corners. A massive, obsidian black spider creature, just like the ones that had chased us in the true world. That's when I realized that while we might have escaped the horrific place, we hadn't come back alone. Part 3. The rehab was immediately quarantined the moment we realized something was wrong. "Stephen has been on the phone all morning. Hasn't he managed to contact someone? Anyone to help us with this?" I muttered as I paced the room. Jessie was reviewing the security footage for the third time, frustrated again that what she'd seen in the surgical ward was not showing up on camera. It was there. I saw it, she insisted. I believe you. I do. Especially given what the doctors have been reporting on various floors. Patients are reporting all kinds of bizarre nightmares, hallucinations. I just wish I knew what it all meant, I said. Lang returned a moment later, shaking his head fearfully. We're on our own. The contacts I had in North Haven say that this is too dangerous to expand any more manpower on. We are stretched rather thin at the moment, he admitted. I gave a short humph and remarked, "Look, if you'd been totally honest with us from the start, then we wouldn't be in this mess, would we, Lang? Just checking, but how much support do you even have from your precious organization?" I told you already, because of the infiltration, that my resources are limited, he said. God, that's great. Meanwhile, giant dream eaters are ravaging people's psyche like it's an all-you-can-eat buffet. So, what do we do about that? I asked. Danny, he's trying to help, my sister said. Well, seems like so far the only thing that's been helpful is staying far away from him and the Janus project as possible. None of us knew what would happen with Kelsey's treatment approach, but the fact we now have these creatures here is actually a good sign, Stephen insisted. Before I got a chance to roll my eyes, he explained. We need to have a way to connect to those that have been lost, including the former leader of my organization, Meredith Parker. She's in there somewhere, and only you two can save her. I didn't realize we were actually agreeing to this lunacy, I said, glaring at Jessie. We don't have a choice now, or more people will suffer, my sister said, fearfully. You need a rest, I said, getting her back to her own bed and turning to Lang. Once she was agreeable to it, I followed him out of the room. Looks like I'll be the test subject this time. Lucky me. We must act fast, Danielle, before these dream eaters leave the hospital to search for food elsewhere, he insisted. We made our way to the infusion clinic where Dr. Kels had administered the drugs to Jessie only a few hours prior, and I got prepped. I did my best not to panic or freeze up as he explained how it would all take place. It was logical and scientific and, seemed safe, but it didn't keep my mind and body from being overwhelmed with fear. Before I was ready, or even if I could be ready, a needle pierced the back of my spine, and it felt like I was drowning. I used to think the concept of astral projection was impossible, but I swear to you I saw Kels and Lang begin to set up IV fluids and other monitors on my numb body as I hung above them. Was I floating? No, I was falling into the true world of the darkness that was all around us. Colors bled into one another and warped in and out of reality as the rehab faded away. Before I knew what was happening, my feet touched green grass, a pasture of endless colors in the sky, and I was upside down. It took me a few seconds before I realized I was in Daleth Valley again. Why were my visions constantly leading me here? Well, this time I chose to find out and made myself walk toward the darker crevices of the sacred ground. I could hear low chanting. A whole congregation of hooded figures was gathered around what appeared to be a monolith of pure marble, as white and clear as a sheet of ice. I moved towards the massive stone, recalling a similar experience my sister and I had had when we'd been at Thurston Manor. It brought back so many nightmares that even in this dark world it made my heart want to explode. The hooded figures stopped their endless supplication and turned toward me. I stopped and froze, expecting the cultists to attack, but instead one of them extended their hand toward me and spoke. It wasn't from a voice, though. It was as if my own subconscious was encouraging me to join them. Sister of blood, your passage to beyond is writ in stone. Awaken the unholy within, and let her vessel be made manifest. My voice shouted. I don't know what came over me next. I joined the throng of faithful and looked toward the monolith. Its glorious white seemed to stretch beyond the sky. I wanted it to go on forever. Then I felt my feet sink, and I looked around to see that myself and the others were melting into the very earth. On the other side was a hellscape, The cultists were now screaming, unable to stop writhing roots from piercing their body. The underbelly of the monolith was draining them of their life. "Victoria!" A scream came to my right. Instinctively I turned and I saw my sister there. But it wasn't the face I knew her to wear. This was older and weathered, a life we'd once had in the past. She pulled me out of the mire and we stood on solid ground again. "Who are you?" I asked, not daring to even fathom the truth. "You know the answer. I'm the former self of the sister you now have. I've guided you for one purpose alone, to bring back your own memories. Let them bleed into the world above, sister. Let us live again," she said. "How would that help?" I asked. "If you don't confront your own inheritance, the cycle will always repeat," the woman told me as she placed a hand on my forehead. Then I was pushed back to the world I knew. Dr. Kels was standing over me, scared and frightened by what the data revealed. This is impossible," he muttered. "Tell me, what did it show?" I asked as I sat up. "You've gone back over 100 years. Your body shows signs of degeneration," he said, gesturing toward the scars that were now visible on my arms and torso. "Every time we step into the true world, it could have this effect on us. Far worse," I realized. "Oh, but the implications. Well, I thought what we'd uncovered already was miraculous, but this defies all belief. You've become a dream walker, able to move amid realities," Kels said excitedly. I didn't share his enthusiasm, though, because even as I watched out of the corner of my eye, I saw different, distinct parts of the mysterious dimension ebbing in and out of the room. The voices I'd heard were now ringing in my head, and there in the hall I saw the same woman that had taken Jessica's voice, standing and waiting. "Doctor, do you see that woman?" I asked. Kels turned and adjusted his glasses, then attempted to use some of his equipment to get a reading on her. "There's definitely an anomaly there, but I'm afraid I can't pick much up," he admitted. "Victoria, take me to the vessel," the woman insisted. Well, I knew she meant Jessica. The thought of this person simply entering my sister's body as though she were a passenger made my entire body shake. "My name's Danielle now, and you haven't told me what benefit will come from doing this," I argued with the spirit. Dr. Kels stepped aside, unsure of what aid he could even offer. "My knowledge of Naviarat. The past shall become the future unless we break the cycle together," she pleaded. "And we can do that if you become a part of Jessie?" I asked. The spirit nodded. Somehow I felt sure to trust her, but I still had doubts. "What do you need my help for? Can't you simply spirit yourself to her?" The woman smiled. "The Eaters of Dreams will try to stop us," she said as she turned toward the hallways. I saw the massive coiling bodies of the dark spiders, and I steeled myself, knowing they'd probably do everything in their power to stop me from going forward. "Right, I'll help you," I decided. I'm not sure what's happened here, but I'll do my best to adjust the dosage of the medication. Perhaps with a stronger hold to the other dimension, it'll aid you?" Kels asked. I gave him a stern nod and waited as he injected me again with another round of the treatment. My body shook, trying to adjust to the way the medicine made my vision blur and contort. The colors of the true world bled all around me. The Dream Eaters began to hiss and move toward us. The spirit that had found its way to me made a sharp cry, and we ran down the hall. The spiders lashed with their long, spindled legs, trying to attack, as we saw other employees of the hospital getting taken down by the beasts. Each time the monsters were able to feast on their fragile psyche, it was like watching a supernatural chaos spread and expand. We barely made it to Jessica's room when I caught my breath and looked toward the spirit. "You have done well, my sister. Now comes the most difficult part," she told me. My mouth felt dry as I looked at Jessica and knew that, to make this work, I would have to subject her to a living nightmare. "Call Kels into this room. We need to prepare for another round," I said as I heard screaming in the halls. Time was running short. Part 4. "I need to go under again, don't I?" I asked as I looked at Danielle's tired frame. I still didn't know exactly what she'd gone through, but she looked worse for wear. The way Dr. Kels explained it, the place took its toll on beings that didn't belong there. Crossing between the worlds was supposed to be a physically impossible task, yet we'd both been given that power, and we needed to use it to help other people. Danielle nodded at my question. "I'm sorry. Back to the mirror world I go, I suppose." "Mirror world? You mean the true world?" Danielle asked. "Yeah, whatever it's called. Let's just do it." Danielle and Dr. Kels looked at each other with worried expressions on their faces. After a moment of silent discussion between the two, they turned their attention back to me. "You're not going back to the true world. You almost died last time. We need to figure out how to fight the dark beings and, more importantly, Navarrete." "How then? If I'm not going back, then what am I doing?" I asked, confused as to why they were prepping me for another injection if they had no intention of sending me back. "You need to relive your past life." "Excuse me? You don't just have the ability to cross worlds. You also have the power to get a glimpse into your past self. This injection will make it easier, but you need to keep focused on the task at hand for it to work." "All right, guess I can do that." "You ready?" I nodded, and with that I felt something surge to life inside me, as if something or someone had entered my body. Danielle had barely even touched me, much less given me the injection, yet I felt myself fade from the world into darkness. "What did you do to me?" "I gave you what you needed to see the past." Her words were so distant. It was as if she was miles away. I could still see her, but it was through an endlessly dark tunnel that stretched all too far away. Then the world vanished. It wasn't for more than a split second, but by the time I returned to my own consciousness, the entire world around me had changed. I no longer found myself within the walls of the hospitals. Instead, I stood at a farmhouse with endless fields in front of me and clear blue skies above. I felt the sun touch my skin, its warmth penetrating deep into my soul. But it wasn't my own soul. In fact, nothing there belonged to me. I'd become another person, someone who had perished long, long ago. A woman approached me. She looked familiar, reminding me strongly of Danielle, but it couldn't possibly be her. She was far too old. "Christine, they're waiting for us." It was an odd sensation, but I knew she was talking to me. I tried to respond, but the body I'd been trapped within wasn't mine to control. Instead, words just formed by themselves, spoken by someone else. "Are you really going to do this?" I asked, without thinking about the words that flowed from my mouth. "It's too late to turn back. The Great War is coming. You know that better than anyone." I looked around me, trying to figure out not only where I was, but when. A newspaper lay on the porch beside me, opened up to a random page. The body I possessed picked it up, just glancing over a few of the articles, but it was enough to give me an idea as to what had happened. July 10th, 1913, it read. I picked it up and read a few of the headlines. "Death Valley hits 134 degrees, the hottest place on our planet." And a smaller one that read, "Tensions in Europe increase as Romania declares war on Bulgaria." "A lot of people are going to die," I said. "The cultists don't care about that." Danielle, or whoever she'd been in a previous life, nodded in agreement. "They want me to tell them who will survive. Those of them who are destined for death want to become one with the monolith. They want to enter the true world." "So what are you going to do?" "I'm going to lie. I'm going to tell them that they're all going to die in the oncoming war. You can't. If they stay here, more people are going to suffer. They'll keep sacrificing innocent people and they won't ever stop. This is the only way. She turned to walk away from me, ready to change the course of the cultist path in life. Their destiny, albeit a dark one, wasn't subject to change, even by us. Still, Danielle wanted to try. If you let them enter the true world, horrible things are going to happen, I argued. I could hear her sulking, but she kept facing away from me. I know, but at least the people who live now are going to be safe. I stood up, ready to physically stop her if I had to. She'd already started walking away, but I had to do something before she sent all the cultists to the true world. I grabbed a rock off the ground, ready to give her one last chance before I knocked her out. Beatrice, please don't do this, I begged. She turned her attention back at me and noticed the rock I was clutching onto. Could you really do it? Could you really kill me to stop me from doing this? We both knew I couldn't hurt my sister. Not for a second did the thought even occur to her, because she knew me all too well. I wasn't strong like her. I wasn't ready to sacrifice someone else. We have the chance to save everyone we know and love, but only if we send the cultists of narrated away. What about the next generation? I asked. They're hopefully able to make the choices we couldn't. With that, I felt myself move towards Beatrice. I, or Christine, couldn't hurt her, nor did she have the willpower to go against her. Together we walked across the field, ready to meet the cultists at the monolith. I tried to scream, I tried to fight back, but the body wasn't mine to control. It was merely a memory of what had happened already. An event that had caused the deaths of hundreds of people in the future, and I could do nothing to stop it. The field seemed to go on forever, leading impossibly far away from the small farmhouse we'd come from. In the distance, nothing but endless grey lay before us, and yet I could hear the chanting of the cultists, getting ready for their ritual. It was so familiar, even though I'd never directly witnessed the monolith before, and I knew exactly what to expect. And then we saw it. The brilliant structure that both amazed and horrified me. Within it lay true darkness. The monolith itself wasn't something just anyone could stumble upon. It was an artifact from a different dimension that only chose those it could use. In that sense, it was sentient, or at least controlled by a powerful being beyond even my own comprehension. There it is, Beatrice said as we walked into an opening in the grass. It moved. The cultists approached us. Beatrice, are you ready to make the sacrifice? She just nodded. Narrated will rise thanks to you, but first we must go to the true world. Wait, what sacrifice are you talking about? I asked. They both turned to me, the cultist with pure joy in his eyes, but Beatrice looked broken. Beatrice will give her life to send us to the true world. The monolith demands a sacrifice for us to be granted access. What? Are you out of your mind? I yelled. It's the only way, Beatrice chimed in. No, I won't let them, I kept screaming as I ran over to place myself between the cultist leader and my sister. You have to leave her the hell alone. Well, the commotion had alerted the other cultists. Some of them stopped their chant, breaking off to surround me. I was hopelessly outnumbered. They rushed over and dragged me away, holding on to me as Beatrice looked over with pity in her eyes. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was only heartbroken because of what she knew I'd shortly be forced to witness. No, please, let her go. Take me instead. They laughed at my helpless screaming. The bargain had already been made, and Beatrice was fully intent on going through with it. They led her over to the monolith, and she reached out her hand to touch it. No sooner had her bare skin touched the smooth stone before it started growing out and enveloping around her. The monolith formed tendrils that fused with her skin, constricting around her chest to the point where she couldn't breathe anymore. No, I yelled. It'll be all right, Christine. You'll know what to do, but this isn't the time. Beatrice managed to cough out, as her ribs were crushed beneath the force of the monolith. At that point, one of the cultists walked up with a knife that looked to be made from the same material as the monolith. He swiftly slit Beatrice's throat, and blood poured out, appearing to be swallowed up by the surface of the monolith. I cried as I watched my sister bleed out. It would only be a minute before she died, and by then she'd been fully consumed. Then, they were all gone. I just fell to the ground. The cultists had vanished into thin air, erased from Earth in favor of the true world. Still, I just lay there on the cold ground and cried from the loss. A part of me had been killed along with my sister, and I'd never felt so utterly alone. At the time, I started to forget that it wasn't my own body, nor my own life. I was trapped inside Christine, living through the hardest moment of her life. Then, the ground beneath my feet vanished, and I could feel nothing but rage and hatred, all accompanied with the will to destroy the monolith. Years passed in a blur, a fact I only noticed when I saw Christine's reflection in a window pane. She looked tired, starved from years of war. It was 1919. The Great War had ended with 20 million deaths, and the Spanish flu had claimed 50 million more. The horrors had broken her, but still she remained firmly planted in the idea of destroying the monolith. We walked through the fields once more, but that time they were barren, destroyed by war and disease, left without people to maintain them. But Christine didn't care. She just needed to find the monolith. She gathered explosives, remnants of the bygone war. With her, she had a few veterans, ready to aid her in her mission to stop Nevrite. Then we arrived, and the monolith was gone, replaced by a massive crater that hadn't been formed by a bomb. It just wasn't there. Christine yelled in anger, and the soldiers scattered to search for the missing artifact. She'd planned for years, gathering enough explosives, waiting through a war and a pandemic, just to return, but it was all for naught. With that, my body disconnected with hers, and I found myself back in the hospital, screaming just like Christine had. Danielle and the doctors had to hold me down to prevent me from hurting myself. "Jessica, you're safe. Calm down," Danielle yelled. When I finally regained my senses, I was exhausted. I could hardly form a single sentence. I know what we have to do," I said out of breath. "We need to destroy the monolith." Part 5. The monoliths, gateways to the true world, and you're saying one of them's close by? It infuriated me no end that this was all Stephen Leng cared about. Not the safety of my sister, or the fact that all our lives were in danger from supernatural forces beyond our universe. All he was concerned about was this scientific discovery and its implications on how we could use this to experiment on me and my sister. It could be, maybe. Well, Derleth Valley is where I think it might appear soon. In the visions of the true world that I've seen, that's where it often takes me and Danielle, my sister told him eagerly. It disgusted me even more that she was so willing to offer to help him, risking her life again for this strange crusade. I don't think we should be gallivanting across the countryside for some supposed giant rock. Our situation here is far more dire, I commented. Surprisingly, Leng agreed with me. Yeah, we do not know how powerful the influence of the Dream Eaters is, but one thing is for certain. They haven't left this hospital. It is the only advantage we have. So let's figure out how to stop them and worry about the gateway later, he said. Jessica was about to make a response when we heard another loud shriek from the halls. The spiders were finding more willing prey in the behavioral health ward, and each time Jessica and I went on the hunt, there would be more of them. My mind was racing to think of a way to put a stop to the creatures, and then I thought of our gift, the one that allowed us to travel between dimensions. Could this be the way for us to trick these monsters? Mr. Lang, give us one more chance to go into the true world. Perhaps we can destroy the monolith from inside the other dimension. Perhaps that will eliminate the threat here, I told him boldly. Truthfully, I did not want to go back. But this time it was going to be different. It had to be. We can go together this time. Jessica and I can go into the true world and find a way to destroy it together. It's the only way, I said, grabbing my sister's hand. Lang looked at us both, surprised that we had the courage to face such unspeakable evil. But we were out of options. The Dream Eaters would take away everything if we didn't act soon. I'll inform Dr. Kells. When we were alone, Jessica looked at me worriedly. I knew what she was thinking. We may not come back this time. It could suck us in when the gate closes. Are you sure you want to be trapped in that dark hell again? She asked. Her lips were trembling. It took all the strength I had not to shudder and burst into tears. To be in that same nightmare, this time with the possibility of never escaping. It was the most dreadful thought imaginable to me. But I stifled a smile and held her hand. I looked over toward her amputated arm and tried to not imagine her losing more of herself just because we were going back to this hellscape. We could lose our very lives, but I knew my sister would go anyway, even if I objected. It was better for us to do it together, even if it was all for nothing. Half an hour later, we were taken to an isolated chamber. The monsters from beyond hadn't managed to reach this area of the ward yet, but our time was running short. Already 13 people had been driven insane by these monsters, and if Dr. Kels was any indication, he too was suffering from nightmarish hallucinations caused by the temporal spiders. His hands were shaky, and it took him longer than usual to set everything up. He kept looking in the corners, as though he thought the room was closing in on us. It made me nervous to imagine that he would be administering the drugs to us. Could we get a few nurses to assist? I asked, trying not to offend him. Lang had finally gotten a few friends from a nearby prison to stop by and offer assistance in security, but honestly I'm not sure it helped much. As the machinery was moved into the room to keep us protected, the soldiers began to act strangely as well. The spiders were moving in and out of the walls. They were melding with the soldiers' bodies. At first I wasn't sure if it was the heightened drugs I'd been given or something supernatural, but a few moments later, the reality was evident. The Dream Eaters were using their reality splicing abilities to move in and out of these men, cutting them like Swiss cheese. Then my vision blurred again, and instead I saw the men were turning their weapons on each other, riddling each other with bullets. They were hardly able to protect themselves, let alone anyone else. Kels and the staff scrambled to close the doors, but I failed to see the point. These nightmares could move in between dimensions and destroy us using our own fears. It was pointless. Our only hope was to get back to the true world. I turned to Jessica, and we didn't even have to speak to one another. We knew the only hope we had was to rely on each other. I injected the needle straight into her amputated arm, as she did the same on my right side, and we were transported together. The world dimmed in color. The chaos around us faded away, and then we were alone in a dark room, only the light of our aura to guide us. It felt like we were falling, drowning, hardly able to breathe. I saw the reflection of Jessica's past lives and my own in an endless cascade of mirrors as we kept going down into the depths of the true world. We weren't entirely alone, I realized, as our feet settled on dark green pastures once again. The old souls we'd once had were there to guide us, to help us fight. The air was electric and alive with power. I could sense the landscape trembling before us as we moved together. In the true world, my sister had her arm back again and was able to move faster. It was almost a miracle, but I knew better than to think this dark and deadly dimension had anything pleasurable to offer. It was clear we were being led into a trap. I can safely say that for a multitude of reasons. 1, the monsters we often saw plague us when we traversed this plane were gone. And 2, We were easily making it to our destination without any obstacles in our path. Something beyond our understanding was guiding us, and it shook me to my core to realize our fates were not in our own hands. My sister could feel it too. Each step forward was not our own. We were in a different world, being brought like lambs to the slaughter. A path appeared before us. We could see the rehab center, and it was glowing with a light from beyond death. Something from the dark sky above us was descending. At first, it looked like drops of rain. Then, as we got closer, I realized it was crystals. Long, thin black crystals smashing into the hospital. As they hit the cement ceiling, hundreds of microscopic spiders pushed their way out, quickly skittering into different holes and tunnels, struggling to find new victims to feed on. Jessica and I paused as we got toward the entrance. "Why is our path leading us here?" she asked. I didn't know, but instead of seeing it filled with victims and patients, it was a dark graveyard. Hundreds of souls taken and smothered and held by the Dream Eaters. Their goal was not even something we could comprehend. Was it just to stir our understanding? To communicate? Were they even hostile? Who could say? The door opened to the clinic and a rush of stiff, cold air came towards us. And then a voice, beckoning us to step in. "Vessels, oh, narrated, enter the womb," it said in a low shriek. It was a dozen different voices, all speaking the same cry, urging us to come forward. The walls and floors were covered in the spiders. They slowly trickled out of the way as we made our way to the main auditorium. Oh, there were so many of them, thousands, maybe millions. And then Jessica and I saw them begin to converge towards the center of the room, merging into a single, terrifying being. "Children, spirits of the Isthos, do you come here to destroy or to serve?" the voice asked. I could feel the power inside me beginning to wane. We were losing our connection. Flashes of the real clinic came in and out of my vision. I saw Leng and the others desperately trying to hold back the Dream Eaters with fire throwers and military rifles. Jessica clung to me and we spoke together. "This is not how we're going to die." Somehow we knew what to say, how to fight. Our past lives were there also, giving us strength. "You and your kind do not belong here," we screamed to the monsters. We held together, and a force from beyond us emerged. It was white and beautiful, like an angel, but with 1,000 eyes and wings, and it had no body. It had no form except skin and eyes and endless wings, brightly moving toward the demon. The building shook. We were being pushed toward the real clinic. Jessica and I saw it happening, and somehow, using whatever supernatural gift that was instinctively given to us, we pushed back. "You delay the inevitable," the voices shouted. The clinic was being pushed into some kind of black hole. I saw nurses and staff scrambling for their lives, clawing to the ground as they were sucked in, unable to stop its insatiable hunger. Leng and the military pushed back. They retreated as I felt my body fall into shock. The connection between us and the true world was fading. We were being pulled back. Jessica screamed, and the ground beneath us began to melt. The world, reality itself, was collapsing here and now. "Danielle!" she screamed. Behind her, her old self screamed to my old life. Our futures and our pasts were converging in this single moment to destroy Nyarfet. The light and the darkness mixed together, and we lost everything. I felt my spirit leave my body, from not just there, but from everywhere. Every version of myself was ripped apart as the monsters fought. And then, it was all gone. All of it. I don't rightly know what happened after that. We were floating for the longest time. Not here, nor there. I think the best way to explain it is that we were both dead. Our bodies were gone. our spirits lost in the void. And then we were back, in a clean room being monitored by Dr. Kels and several other men I didn't recognize. I could hardly feel my body or understand my surroundings. It was like coming up from drowning again. The constant hum of the void, the dream eaters, the endless possibilities of evil around us. It was always there. But now we were here. "Daniel, Jessica," a voice said through an intercom. It sounded familiar. "Stephen?" I asked in a whisper. It didn't sound like my voice. I looked down at my hands. My skin looked different. My body felt different. "This is going to be a lot to take in," Leng said through the intercom. The date is now September 2020. Jessica and I were dead for almost half a year. And in that time, what was left of Stephen Leng and the Janus Project, well, that's now dead. They've lost the support from the military. They have nothing except the warrants for their arrests. Yes, they were blamed for the losses at the clinic. 113 people died that day, and the others have yet to be found. The entire clinic was destroyed, and the radical experiments of Dr. Kels were blamed. Thanks to that same doctor, though, they found a way to bring us back from the voids, to be able to be placed into fresh bodies. Well, according to Leng, they were found in the Dunwich Cemetery, under the same gravestones as our ancestors. Fresh, faceless bodies that gradually became ours. They're still foreign to me and Jessica even now as we stand here at this funeral, which, by the way, is our testimony to saying goodbye to our old lives. The threat has subsided for now. The Dream Eaters left when we died. Stephen theorized that they were connected to the dimensional experiments as well, which, by the way, were ultimately a waste of time. We never found that damn monolith, nor Meredith Parker. All of this feels like it was a waste. But one thing is a ray of hope. The fact that my sister and I came back from the dead. We defied the odds. We came back to fight. And this fight is far from over. The Human Experiment Chamber. I am Harvey Seiden, a humble researcher working for the International Secret Service. I was delighted to find out that I was leading the ISS's newest project, and testing is taking place primarily underground next week in the Human Experiment Chamber, SF-23. Its aim is to develop an innovative and shocking method of torture which is designed to discourage potential ISS members from betraying the organization, and as a punishment for captured hitmen from overseas, discovered to be targeting ISS leaders. Over the course of the project, I will document every detail in this written report, along with a video to accompany the results of each experiment. After the project has formally ended, I'll suggest the best conclusion, or conclusions, to the testing based on the evidence collected. Once again, I thank my superiors for allowing me to pioneer this project, which will undoubtedly benefit the ISS community for as long as it exists. H.J. Seiden, human biologist, qualified researcher, SG-64. Well, that's the opening statement for my report. Now, I don't blame you for thinking I'm some kind of insane genius, but I'm not the kind of Frankenstein you see on television. In fact, I'll admit, I'm a pretty emotionally unstable guy, and I've been hiding myself behind a facade since I joined the service. I'm working for the ISS, a criminal organization, and I've been working there for a long time now. The headquarters is situated underground on the coast of Concaven Island. It's like the Mafia, just less well known, and it's brought me a handful of problems as a US citizen, not to mention some emotional trauma too. But I couldn't resist the temptation of good pay for the rest of my life. So at the end of 2 years of service, I signed the unbreakable contract. After a further 2 years in the job, I began to believe that anyone, whether they started meek or macho, could condition themselves into a state of mind where they felt almost no empathy for anyone else. The human brain needs conditioning to keep its empathy senses refreshed, so the more you don't use it, the less you'll be inclined to feel sorry for random people, right? But then I realized it wasn't that simple, and sadly I realized too late. I'll take my word for it. If you're a normal, sane human being, don't ever try to fit in with the psychos. That's because there's a difference between the fakers and the real deal. What I'm trying to say is, you will never know what's inside the mind of a psychopath if you weren't born one yourself. Anyone that tries to believe otherwise will, ultimately, drive themselves insane. Part 1. 9 a.m. It was time to meet the unfortunate victims. There were 13 inmates who'd arrived from a prison on the island. The purpose of seeing the subjects before beginning the tests was for estimating measurements, but it was still nice to get to know them before sending them to their deaths in the most painful ways imaginable. There were 2 women and 11 men. As I was scribbling down descriptions on my notepad, one of the big guys tried to attack me. Although he could only go as far as the metal bars of his cells would allow, the sudden outburst still made me jump. I made a mental note to order extra restraints for this one. I put my clipboard down, then decided to talk to them. Some swore at me in every sentence, but most of them were nicer than I'd imagined, which was creepy. Especially the middle-aged lady who'd poisoned her husband and had offered me a foot massage. I asked them what crimes they'd committed, and whether they were scared at all. Some notable answers included things to do with animals and my mom. The sight of a teenager in one of the cells caught my interest. I'd never seen such a young inmate arrive here for testing before, and I wondered what crime he'd committed. I asked him if he was afraid of his approaching fate, and he answered, "I'm less scared than you are." I'm sad to say that he was probably telling the truth. A thin white smile spread across his face when he saw my expression change. I'm not sure why, but I suddenly felt slightly nauseous. I convinced myself he was bluffing and walked away quickly. A young blonde lady refused to talk to me at all. She sat in the corner of the last cell, sobbing continuously. I guessed that she was in her mid-20s. I asked why she was crying, and she tried her best to convince me that she'd been falsely accused of murdering her sister. Well, they don't lie when they tell me the most innocent-looking ones are always the most cunning. 1 p.m. I decided to skip lunch for reasons I'm sure you'll understand. My heart was beating fast, but I did my best to hide my anxiety, then called in the first test subject. I asked my scientist to set up the camera and other monitors whilst I prepared the instrument of death. Originally, I had no idea what to name it, but my little bored scientist suggested Angel's Wings, and he described it well. I chose the macho-looking guy who tried to attack me to go first. When he walked in, I expected at least a swagger or a glare, but I got none of that. I could see it in his eyes. The guy was more terrified than he'd ever been in his life. Security strapped him into the long box-shaped metal frame. He was encased in what looked like a hollow cage without the extra bars in the middle. 2 flat iron bars met in the center of his body. Attached to their undersides were many small, sharp iron spikes, suspended above his chest. The guard nodded at me, and without warning I pressed a button which suddenly lowered the 2 iron bars, plunging the spikes into the middle of his chest and abdomen. He screamed and clenched his fists as blood began oozing out, then turned his head to look at me. I raised my eyebrows. "I'll only start when you're ready. Remember, the longer you wait, the more it'll hurt," I reminded him. He breathed heavily, and turned his head back around to look at his bleeding body. Then he winced and looked away again. "What are you going to do to me?" he yelled. "The bars," I pointed, "are going to move in opposite directions until you split open." He took a moment to digest the thought. Can you hold my hand?" he pleaded, like a little child. I hadn't expected to hear that from a guy like this, and I was almost amused. "No," I answered straightforwardly. "Why, are you afraid I'll break your bones?" Can I start now? Okay, then. Just don't tell my family how I died. I don't want them to know what happened to me. We're not going to tell your family anything. Cheers. He wheezed quietly, and then closed his eyes. Fuck this stupid-ass world. Just do it. The scientists sat opposite me, holding their pens ready above their notepads, observing, eyes wide open like hungry wolves staring at prey. Simultaneously, I pressed the start button on the timer and flicked the switch which started his ordeal, preparing myself for the screams. The two metal bars began to pull his skin apart incredibly slowly. He grimaced with his eyes closed for 10 seconds and held it in for as long as he could, but when the green line on the pain monitor leapt up, his eyes burst open and he let out a blood-curdling shriek. Around the 3-minute mark, his organs started to be exposed. I had to pause the machine temporarily, since he was close to passing out. I restarted it after 2 minutes. He was too tired to scream by the end of 10 minutes, when all of his organs were completely exposed. But it wasn't until they started to slide out of him when I started to cringe. I reminded myself that he was still alive and conscious whilst all this was happening. And suddenly, I had an inexplicable urge to vomit. I knew I needed to keep focused and watch the graphs in case he died, but my mind drifted elsewhere. Though he was just a criminal, he had a family and people that probably cared about him. What if they knew that I was the one doing this to him? I had a family too, and admittedly I hadn't told them the entire truth about my profession. What would they think? He was dying from something I created. I never thought about it in that way before. To be quite honest, it hurt me inside when I did. Well, I told myself that his family weren't here. They would never know of this, never know that I did it. Well, they probably didn't like him that much anyway. Doesn't fucking matter. Just do your job. I walked to the other side, where neither the scientist nor the camera could see, pretending to analyze the breathing graph in more detail. And there I gripped his hand, slippery from the blood dripping down it. He turned his head towards me, and for a second I thought I could see some sort of surprise in his eyes. I prayed that he wouldn't spend his last seconds alive cursing me. And then his skin ripped from his sides and dangled from the iron nails. He continued to breathe heavily for a few moments before he died, and the machine made a high-pitched beeping noise. Swallowing, I let go of his hand and waited as his organs sloshed out of him one by one and onto the floor. The timer said 15 minutes, 35. And the lady scientist stopped the camera. 15 minutes, 35 seconds. How was it? I asked. She looked down at her clipboard. The skin stayed intact, which was good, as it was on top of the priority list for this device. It moved outwards at a steady rate too. However, continued the bald scientist, the time he was alive fell short of the predicted time by half a minute. Also, if you were to redesign the model, we suggest some sort of appliance to keep the organs inside the body. That might improve the time. Their voices were calm and steady as they talked. I looked into their eyes, cold, robotic, unblinking. I wondered if they'd ever been sympathetic to anyone in their whole lives. I wonder if they were wearing masks like me. Right. Yeah, I was thinking that too. I'll take it into account in the report. Part 2. 2 days later, 4 p.m. My boss Orman grinned the whole time as he watched the video, occasionally making unsympathetic noises such as ouch and ooh. These people were not human. Either that or I was a lot less tough than I thought I was. It was time for the second torture instrument. This one was less unique than the first one, in the sense that similar things had been tried before, but it was the boss's idea, not mine. Apparently, it was also the one which kept the victim alive and suffering for the longest time. I called for security to bring me a random test subject. She was dragged into the room, screaming and begging. It was the young lady with the blonde hair. She shouted that she didn't do it, and that she was innocent, but I was taking none of it. I signaled at security to strap her into the confinements. I had a feeling she wasn't going to tell me when to kill her, so I didn't bother to warn her. Slowly, I took out a syringe and a small jar full of bluish-yellow liquid. I closed the box, then unscrewed the jar lid, sucking out a syringe full of its contents. "No, please, don't do this to me." I walked closer, holding my poker face, showing her I was uninterested. She continued to sob and pant. "I wasn't the one," she whispered as she shook her head frantically. "I know who killed her. It wasn't me. Don't do it." I positioned the syringe above her collarbone and plunged it into her neck. She moved too much, so I had to steady the needle to avoid it snapping. As the fluid entered her skin, her neck started to turn slightly blue, and her veins swelled up. She gasped in agony. Then I ran over to the laptop and started the timer. According to the measurements, she'd be dead in around 3 days. "Strap her head to the wall," I told the lady scientist. "When her neck turns white, you can leave. I'm off to take a bite." "Harvey Seiten," she shrieked at an ear-piercing pitch, just as I was about to walk out of the door. I turned around, my eyes wide open. Oh, I hated it when they called my name. "You're a smart young person. You've got a lot left to live for. Why did you become a murderer?" "Murderer? I wasn't a murderer. It was my job to kill murderers. And that doesn't count as murder, does it? Who are you to judge?" Something clicked inside me, and I suddenly felt feverish, like my brain was overheated. "Well, I would ask you exactly the same," forgetting momentarily that she wasn't a guy. "I really didn't. You have to believe me." I finally went to get my lunch. Man, it had been a rough day. I changed my clothes and came out from underground after 2 hours of security checks, and a thought crossed my mind. How was I so sure that she was guilty of the murder? Was it faith in the justice system? Well, most likely, of course, but it didn't matter whether she was or not. She was already going to die. But it felt like I needed some sort of proof, or I'd be uncomfortable living with the possibility that I killed an innocent for the rest of my life. 7 p.m. Just one more hour of goddamn report writing, then I could go home. My eyes were starting to see double. But then there were the security checks again. I had to keep my profile real low working for the ISS, and that meant suffering another 2 hours of fatigue. An alarm sounded. I got out of my cubicle to take a look at what was happening. The secret agents scurried around like black mice, mainly towards the left corridor, so I followed them. It just so happened that Allman was looking for me. He led me to the cells in which the test subjects were kept, and I saw all of them strapped tightly to the wall, much like the lady in the experiment chamber. 2 of the cells, which I realized belonged to the middle-aged woman and a bald guy, were empty. I asked my boss what was happening, and he explained that one of the guys monitoring the CCTV footage wasn't paying attention, which had allowed the 2 removed subjects to commit suicide by banging their heads on the wall repeatedly. Part 3. 1 day later, 4 p.m. I checked on the lady still strapped in the chamber before I began testing on the next victim. Unsurprisingly, she'd stopped resisting and her body hung almost lifeless. Her whole body had turned white except for her face, which had a blue tinge. Sweat still dripped from her forehead, so I gave her some water, then examined the graphs, comparing them to the ones produced by the first test subject. Pain receptors detected slightly lower levels of trauma than the first, but it had a tendency to increase as the victim approached death. Security produced a crooked old guy with the most circular spine I'd ever seen, and they looked at me as if asking whether this guy was suitable or not. "Yeah, he'll do. Strap him in." I fastened my goggles, then put on my gloves and protective clothing. He made no noise, just looked around. I was hoping that I'd started to get accustomed to the project since this was my 3rd test already, but as I imagined him crying out in pain, I felt that inevitable sense of dread return. It was annoying me now. He sat down on a metal chair with a circular base. Unlike the others, his eyes told me nothing. He just seemed like a man tired of being alive. The chair was nailed tightly to the wall behind it and was clamped to the ground for extra security. His limbs were locked in place. His arms were spread in a T-shape across the wall, and his legs were fastened to the legs of the chair. Then his head was strapped into a solid square-shaped device with an iron frame, and the scientists used 2 tiny metal clamps to clamp his eyelids wide open. Using more metal clamps, the device positioned a curved block of solid green acid just a millimeter or 2 in front of his open eyes. A large glass box was placed over his head. "When you're ready." There was no hesitation at all. I pulled a lever, and the device moved the block of acid so that it was pressed against his eyes. He screamed, and I quickly flicked a switch above my head, which first sealed the glass box so that it became airtight, then activated a heater which produced a temperature of around 50 degrees Celsius. As the acid melted, it burned his eyes and skin. The green line shot up instantly, and the device rattled as he tried to move. An hour later, there was nothing left except for patches of black, red, and green. His face was pink, and the skin of his cheeks and forehead was burnt raw and purple. He groaned constantly. I couldn't resist closing my eyes for a while because I didn't want to look anymore. There were cameras and observers everywhere doing that for me, so I didn't have to anyway. Surely I could give myself a little comfort by saying that he deserved what he got. I took a deep breath, then opened my eyes again and turned to the scientists. "It ends here when the acid melts completely. 1 hour, 3 minutes. I pressed the last button, and a blade sliced his head off completely. Part 4. I sat at my desk, typing away. Clunk. Abruptly I spun around on my chair. There was nothing behind me, so I shut the door and continued writing the reports. I planned to upload the video along with it too, as I usually did. However, I seemed to have misplaced my laptop, and that was a problem because I transferred the video files onto there from the camera. The lights flickered, and I heard more bumping and knocking noises, but I wasn't sure where they were coming from. Just as I was about to get up and investigate, the phone rang and I sat back down to pick it up. Harvey Seiden, from room SG-64. Who's speaking? This is Allman. Well, hi, boss. How can I help? I'd like you to show what you've done so far regarding your report to our newest contract killer. Treat this also as part of the ISS contract testing. I zoned out and stopped listening to his words. Someone or something was slowly shifting into view of the cubicle window. Someone with her face whiter than paper. Someone blonde, clutching her neck. She limped closer and closer to the small glass viewing pane in front of me. I panicked as a million questions raced through my mind. How did she get out? How could she have moved all the way across the corridor without being seen? What the hell should I do now? She turned her head and blood dripped from her mouth and nose down onto her white prison uniform. When the side of her lips curved upwards into a smile, I nearly shit my pants. There was only a thin sheet of glass separating her from me. Seiden, are you still there, Seiden? The voice came from the telephone, which I dropped at my feet. I've come to warn you, she spluttered. They told me to. They said they'll get you, and everyone you love. What? What are you talking about? I yelled. You have a young brother called Joey. He lives with your parents on the coast. Do you know where they are? How the hell did you know that? She was bringing up family members I hadn't seen in ages, since I'd started working for the ISS. They took your laptop. They know everything about you. You can't hide from them anymore. Who is they? You'll see. A bead of sweat trickled down the side of my face. The problem was, it wasn't my laptop. It was the ISS's on which they stored the database of their employees. Furthermore, if they knew things like my brother's name, they must have also been able to access it with the password. My mind was in a chaotic state, but I only worried truly about one thing. Whoever they were, they had access to information about me which they weren't supposed to know. My address, and the address of my family members. I flicked the emergency switch and bolted the fuck out of there. 2 seconds later, security guards grabbed the lady and dragged her back to her cell, following the trail of blood. I wondered what on earth had gone wrong. Then, after I entered the imprisonment chamber with the security guards, I immediately knew who they were. 2 of the doors of the cells were left wide open, and I couldn't believe it. "Who's in charge of the security cameras here?" I yelled. The inmates stared at us, heads strapped to the wall, smiling unnervingly. The lady scientist ran into the chamber. "I believe it was the man wearing the trench coat. He told me he wanted to have a word with you." "Well, I'm not going to bloody talk to him. Just tell him he's fired from my department for neglect and misconduct. Right now." And she ran off without a word, and so did I, back through the hallway and into my office cubicle. Before my boss could catch me, I'd secured all the locks on the door and took out my personal cell phone, dialing my brother's number. He'd ask about this mess, and I'd have to cover it up somehow, but first I had to warn him that his life was in danger. He didn't pick up the first time, so I tried again. I was relieved for a second when he did, until I heard the voice on the other end speak. "Hi, bro. How you doing?" It was cold and brittle, nothing like Joey's voice. "Who are you?" "You know who I am, Harvey. You wouldn't forget your own brother, would you?" "Oh, cut it out. Tell me what you've done to him." "If you really want to know, you'll have to be patient." "How did you get past security?" "I said, you'll have to wait." The line cut off, and I steadied my breathing as best I could, but I still wasn't able to stop myself shaking. Should I call the police? No, there's nothing they'd be able to do. My phone vibrated, and an email popped up. There was no subject, and the only word in the email was, "Enjoy." Great, they'd found out my email address too. And what the hell were these attachments? The thumbnails were blurred, so I couldn't tell what it was exactly. I uploaded the videos onto the computer and clicked on the first one, which was named Man 1. After a brief period of static noise, the picture came into view. The video quality was bad, but I could make out that it was some sort of warehouse. 3 figures sat in clear view next to each other, each tied to a chair by their arms and legs. From left to right, I recognized them as my dad, my mom, and my brother Joey. They were unconscious, and their heads drooped to the side. Panic came over me, and I choked on my saliva, spluttering as I continued to watch. My family were in danger, and it was all because of me. Someone began to talk, but I couldn't hear his voice over the sound of the alarm and the chaotic yelling in the background. I turned up the volume and rewound. "Hello, Satan." It was the same creepy voice I'd heard on the other end of the line just now. A man walked into view, though I could only see him from the waist downwards. He was wearing black jeans and sneakers. Another one followed him, wearing the prison uniform trousers, and was barefoot. The guy in the sneakers was on the left. He poured water on my parents and Joey, and they began to regain consciousness slowly. They were all in a state of shock. "Where the fuck is this?" I heard Joey yell. "Who the—" Another voice silenced him. It belonged to the teenager. "This is for the big guy." He pointed at my dad, who looked around, terrified. "Wait. Take the phone. Go to the other side," he instructed the other guy. The camera moved up and closer to my dad as the teenager flipped the chair so that my dad was lying on the floor on the chair back. When they both took out knives, I realized what was going to happen. No, "No, you've got to be kidding me," I whispered. There was screaming and shouting in the background. They stabbed my dad just below his neck and pulled down sharply, splitting his abdomen. Then they used the knives to cut him open, exposing his organs. I couldn't watch, so I looked away. When I looked back, my dad had stopped yelling in pain, and his head had dropped. "No, fuck," I screamed, as I felt tears roll down my face. My nails had punctured the skin of my palms, and there was blood on my sleeves. The video was cut off, and the window closed. I still couldn't stop shaking and breathing hard. I clicked on the second video, named Woman 2, and braced myself for the worst. But I wasn't ready for what I would see next. The footage was shaky because the teenager was holding the camera. The other guy was in the scene, and he'd put a hand over my mum's mouth to stop her screaming. Joey yelled at him to let go of my mum, but his anguished cries were left unheard. "This is for the blonde chick," he said. He held a glass bottle full of some strange red liquid, which fizzed about. I screamed when I realized what he was about to do next. He unwrapped a syringe he'd taken from the cardboard box on the floor, then extracted some of the liquid in it. He proceeded to inject it into her neck. Then he chucked it over his shoulder. The chair rocked back and forth as my mum yelled in pain, and her legs kicked the chair. Minutes later, blood squirted out of her eyes, and her skin had turned blue as she suffocated to death. I closed it down, sobbing uncontrollably. I felt drops of blood slither down my arms as I clicked on the final video, titled Man 3. They'd switched roles again. Now the teenager was in the scene and the camera focused on Joey. "Dude, bring it closer," he told the other guy. When he did, I was able to see the stains the tears had made on Joey's face. "This is for the hunchback." His voice was almost happy. He took the bottle of red liquid from the previous clip and unscrewed the cap, laughing. Joey cried and yelled at him to stop. Both guys started laughing wildly as he put on some plastic gloves and pinched Joey's face. He poured the liquid directly onto his face, burning it pink and black. Joey's screams were muffled out by the sound of gargling and choking. And then I vomited. I skipped the last 10 seconds or so, as I couldn't bear to watch it all. Both guys were in view now, the teenager holding the camera like he was taking a selfie. "Do you know what this is?" the other guy asked me directly, as he pulled out the laptop from inside the cardboard box. "We saw the videos you made, so we decided to make our own as well. We thought it was rather fucking mean, so we decided to give you a taste of your own medicine. You can't get us, but we'll see you soon, Harvey Seidman. We're coming for you." And then the two murderers laughed madly. The video turned black and the browser closed for the last time. They'd split my dad open like I'd split open the first man. They'd injected my mom with poison like I'd injected poison into the blonde lady. And they burned the face of my brother like I'd burned the face of the old man. They'd made me pay. And that was it. I prayed the videos were fake or something, but who was I kidding? I'd sent my own family to their deaths, and they'd never even been told what was happening. Essentially, I'd killed them. Now karma had sealed my fate, and I was next. I understood real pain. For the first time in my life, I asked myself, why did I not have the dignity to treat each human being as a life? Why the fuck did I allow myself to take up a job which would cause not just pain and suffering for the victims, but endless grief for their families as well? Ultimately, I dragged myself into a position so low even criminals would mock my name. Anyone working for the ISS was a cursed madman. I wasn't a psychopath. I didn't want to be a psychopath, and I was going to stop pretending to be one too. Someone was knocking on the door, but I ignored it. I wondered why, when I held the bloody hand of the dying man, Did I not clench my fists till my nails made my hands bleed? Why, when I injected the poison into the veins of the lady, did I not cry and yell for her pain to stop? Why, when I scorched the face of the old crook, did I not vomit in disgust? I knew what I had to do. I unlocked the door and raced past the man waiting for me outside. The boss's office was in the building below, and I was sure he was at the scene of the discovered breakouts. I took the lift down and went into the room, searching for his gun. Grabbing it from the top shelf, I took the lift back up and bolted through the empty hallway. Employees and contract killers alike had gathered around the imprisonment chamber, and an irate, red-faced Orman was cursing, trying to figure out what had happened. The inmates knew everything, and they laughed and spat at him. I pushed past them with all my strength until I found myself standing back in the experiment chamber, where only the blonde lady was still restrained. I locked the door behind me, blocking out most of the noise. She was still strapped tightly against the wall, and her face was deathly pale. Her body convulsed violently. Using what little strength she had left, she turned to look at me. I walked closer to her, then aimed the gun at her head. "I believe you," I said. "Whether you're telling the truth or not, I still believe you. Because you were right, I am a murderer." Her face lit up, and I pulled the trigger, putting her out of her misery. I sat down and cried for a long time. I cried because I realized the barbaric shame I'd brought upon humanity, and how I'd failed to see it until it was too late. If I were the Harvey Sighton everyone thought I was, I wouldn't be here sobbing like a baby. I'd be denying that I ever did anything wrong, carrying on with my life, feeling no shame or remorse. But I'm not a psychopath, and I think that somewhere in the back of my mind I always knew I would never live up to my name, and I lived in fear of the day that I'd acknowledge it. Well, my story ends here. I hope you enjoyed it, because you're not going to hear from me again. I'm not proud of a single thing I've done in my life, except for what I'm about to do now, because if I've learnt one thing from all this, it's that I should never have been born. Someone's telling me to open the door. I have the gun pointed at my head, but I'm hesitant, because I'm afraid. Wait a minute. Harvey Jack Sighton afraid? What irony. No doubt the people I butchered were afraid, but it's not like they had any choice. I'm the one giving myself the easy way out. It's time to fix that mistake named the existence of Harvey Sighton. It's time to end it here. Part 5. The lady scientist sauntered into the research hall. She had a proud grin on her face as she looked around. A while later, everyone stopped talking and stared at her, wondering what the hell she was doing. At last, she spoke. "Guess who Orman's new head researcher is?" Everyone clapped with congratulation. She walked over to her new assistant, the little bald scientist, who patted her on the back. "You won't go bats and shoot yourself like Sighton did, right?" "Of course not. I'm a professional." She took care to emphasize that word. Well, I remember he said something like that as well. "Never mind. When are you going to restart the testing?" Her grin widened, spreading from ear to ear. "Yes, I've got everything planned. We're starting tomorrow. I modified Sighton's remaining prototypes with my own little touch, so they're going to produce the best results possible." "What? Right now? We haven't even prepared the experiment chamber." "Then what the hell are you standing around for?" she snapped. "And while you're at it, tell Orman we need 2 more subjects to replace the ones that got away." "Whatever you say." Now, where was his laptop, containing the videos? She couldn't find it anywhere in his room, but it probably would reappear later. She walked into the empty chamber and stood still momentarily to calm herself. She'd never been more pleased in her life. This was where she would continue his work, and she couldn't wait another second to start. She sat at the desk and began to think about his suicide, which had occurred to her as strange. Seidon's prototypes and report were both excellent, admittedly better than anything she could ever produce. He was the perfect man for the job, and it was the perfect job for him. Why a man in such a great position would want to kill himself was beyond her understanding. And she would never understand, because she was pure evil. She'd been born that way. The Human Experiment Chamber, Episode 2. Yvonne Gates was head researcher. Orman had been forced to promote her after security discovered the dead body of Harvey Seidon lying in the experiment chamber 5 weeks ago. The reason behind his suicide was still a mystery, and though she thought about it for a long time, she was never able to reach a sensible conclusion as to why he'd finally pulled the trigger. However, that issue didn't matter anymore, because she had now become the third most respected figure on Conchaven Island, standing only before headquarters boss Orman and the boss of the ISS. She'd finally realized her secret childhood dream, to become one of the most feared criminals in the world. The project was nearly over, which disappointed her slightly. Over the weeks, she'd enjoyed using Seidon's prototypes to butcher, burn, and skin most of the remaining test subjects. She was proud of the tests, because they produced decent results which delighted the boss. Their screams did not haunt her, but pleased her very much, and each experiment prompted her to take the next to more extreme heights. Now there were only 3 left alive, lying in wait for death to come, terrified. Furthermore, her pay had been tripled. She couldn't have been happier in her life. Sitting in Seidon's cubicle, which was now her own, she unwrapped a packet of crisps and put her feet up on the desk. As soon as she reclined back in her chair, the phone rang and she rolled her eyes, taking her feet off the desk again to reach it. Yvonne Gates, SG-64. May I know who's speaking? Yeah, I'll tell you who's speaking. It's your boss, Orman. Oh, hello, Orman. What can I do for you? She always called him by his last name, never boss. That was what Seidon used to call him, and she refused to follow in his footsteps. She refused to suck up to him. The only person she would call boss was the real boss himself. I want to discuss private matters. Please come to my office. Sure, I'll come over when I finish my lunch. No, Gates. You'll be over here right now. Orman's secret. Gates, I'm warning you, he growled. You may think you're something. The boss might reckon that too, but I know what you want. And you know it too, so don't deny it. Orman, I have absolutely no idea what you're going on about. For some reason, the one time Yvonne Gates ever told the truth in her life, Orman still hadn't believed her. I knew you wouldn't admit it. You're a goddamn fox, that's what you are. Never mind, it's only natural. I'd want exactly what you want if I were in your position. But remember, you're just a temporary replacement. You're not half the man Seidon was, and you never will be. That's a little sexist. You know what I fucking mean. Now go away and just remember that I'll be watching every move you make. Sorry, Orman, but the language you're using is threatening. I could get you reported if... Gates, just get out of my sight. I refuse to leave until an explanation has been... Get out, Orman yelled in fury, slapping the keyboard on his desk. He picked up the cordless phone and aimed it at her head. Without hesitation, she sprinted out of his cubicle and wondered what the hell was wrong with him. Gates and Orman hadn't been getting on particularly well since he'd been forced to promote her. He didn't like her self-worshipping personality and much preferred Seidon, who'd been naturally quiet and never questioned his superiors. She couldn't deny that she enjoyed Seidon's company as well, but now she'd replaced him, and she was going to make it clear that she was there to stay. And strangest of all, she couldn't understand why Orman had burst out like that. There had been tension between them, but it had never gotten violent until then. What was he so worried about? Something he thought she apparently knew? A secret? Well, for once, she didn't know anything she wasn't supposed to know, and that worried her. Suddenly, Max Bridges appeared right in front of her from nowhere, making her lose her train of thought. Bridges was the good-looking contract killer who'd recently been employed by Allman and moved from an underground ISS branch in Indonesia to the HQ. He was a smooth guy with the most gorgeous neck-length dark hair and a smile that would make any girl swoon. But she could argue that she was pretty attractive herself, being a woman in her mid-20s. That's why he'd seemed to have taken a strong liking to her after he joined the HQ. She didn't deny that he was pretty cool, but as of now, she wasn't interested. He was merely a tool she could use in her rise up the ranks, just like everyone else. She stumbled backwards and nearly fell, but he caught her arm just in time. "How have you been, babe?" He winked twice as he spoke. "Not bad. You?" Bridges lifted her chin and leaned in for a kiss, but the grin on his face disappeared when he felt sharp fingers grip his neck. The idea. They walked together through the central hallway, side by side. "That hurts, you little fuck," moaned Bridges as he rubbed the bottom of his chin. "That'll teach you to touch a girl." Thinking about Allman again, she found herself glaring angrily at the back of his head as she passed his cubicle window. "Bridges, do you like Allman?" she suddenly asked, her voice no louder than a whisper. He raised his eyebrows disappointedly at her, as if he were listening to a little girl beginning to gossip. "Yes, I love almonds." "Seriously? Allman?" He chuckled. "To be honest with you, I haven't known him as long as you, so I can't really judge any better than you can. He doesn't look that great, though. Why? What's he done to you now?" "Remember, this is strictly between us two. Do you understand?" "Sure thing, babe." "So, just a minute ago," she began, "he called me into his place to yell at me. But the thing is, this time he kept on saying that he thought I knew something, or that I was going to do something. And then he demanded I admit it. I don't know what the hell he's bullshitting on about." She took a breath, then continued. "Then I got the fuck out of there, because he was going to chuck something at me. Do you think he's going nuts?" "I don't know. Well, he definitely doesn't treat me like that. I haven't signed the contract yet, even after 5 years of working at the ISS, so if he did dare to yell at me, I'd get myself out of here and the boss would kill him for losing someone productive and valuable like me." "That was stupid, Bridges. I signed the damn thing a year into the job. Now I'm stuck here for the rest of my life." "Well, I'm sure it's not just that. You mentioned he likes Satan, right?" "Yeah, and he's using that against me as well. He keeps on feeling the need to remind me that I'm not as good as Satan. Well, at dick-sucking. Bullshit." "Well, I definitely hope you are," he smiled. She looked at him angrily and sighed. They were both clueless, but then he thought about it for a while and he finally understood. "You said he accused you of knowing something, of wanting to do something, am I right?" "Yeah, I couldn't imagine what, though." Bridges suddenly laughed out loud, hysterically. "How on earth could you be so stupid?" he remarked. "What?" "Look, think about who you were and who you are now. He hates you because he knows you like taking stuff for yourself. Oh, don't look at me like that. Everyone knows you're like that, even me. His favorite employee, Sidon, just died, and now he's been forced to make you the head researcher. So were you just going to stop it there? Weren't you thinking of, I don't know, maybe getting promoted just a little further?" At first she didn't understand, but then she realized what he was getting at. You see, both Allman and Bridges were both thinking one step ahead of her. They seemed to know her far better than she knew herself. "Oh, you're right," she gasped. "He thinks I'm going to try and steal his job." "Wow, and Allman thought he knew what you were thinking. Talk about smart," he jeered. "But you're the type who usually plans these evil things. Why didn't you think of such an obvious thing to do?" "I don't know. My mind was wandering at the time, and I was too busy enjoying myself with that project." I wasn't really thinking about stuff like that. You mean, that project? Well, too much blood and guts for my taste. I'd rather just shoot them. But I guess you like that kind of thing, you creepy psycho. I suggest you watch your mouth, because you're talking to the head researcher here. Yeah, whatever. See you later, babe. Feel free to cut me open any time. He blew a kiss as he walked down another corridor, and she rolled her eyes again. Bridges was smarter than he looked, and she reckoned staying on his good side would do her well. Still, she couldn't understand why such a blatantly obvious idea hadn't even popped into her mind. Now she knew what Ulmer was thinking. She could put her worries to the side. Hallucinations. She made herself tea before returning to the imprisonment chamber. The security camera had run out of battery, so the 3 remaining inmates had been left unsupervised for at least 3 or 4 days. Jackson, the bald scientist who was monitoring the security pictures, had forgotten to feed them, and they sat stationary in the corners of their cells. When she entered, carrying a handful of batteries, they glared at her menacingly. "How you doing, boys?" They didn't reply, but started growling in anticipation. She dragged the stool across the room and positioned it under the broken camera. The soon-to-be test subjects watched every move she made, lying completely still in waiting. She stepped up onto the stool and removed the camera from the wall. "Yvonne Gates." She heard an ominous whisper from behind her. "Who's that?" "Yvonne Gates." It came again. "You want to do it. You do." She heard another voice. "You want to do it. You know you want to. You want it, you do. And you're gonna get it, aren't you?" "Stop it. Stop," she demanded, becoming a little afraid. She turned around and all 3 inmates were clutching the bars of their cells, staring at her with wide eyes. The 3 voices spoke in unison. They all told her to do it. Were they trying to scare her? "Kill him, Yvonne Gates. Do it. You can do it. You want to do it, don't you, Yvonne Gates? We want you to. Just do it. Just kill him." "What? Kill who?" Even though she asked, somehow in the back of her mind she knew who they were talking about. "You don't like him, do you? Then just kill him. Slice him open and it's all yours. You know you want to do it." It was crazy. Where were they getting the ideas from? She glanced down at her hands. Even they were telling her to do it. Could she really? "Do it, Yvonne Gates. Just kill him. You know you want to." She lifted her head again. To her surprise, she saw all the inmates back where they were, huddled in the corners of their cells. They were no longer staring at her, no longer gripping their cell bars. They didn't speak and made only quiet, animalistic noises. Confused, she shook her head. Had she really imagined that whole episode? If she had, well, it meant something. Even her subconscious mind was telling her to get rid of him. No, it was telling her more than just that. It was trying to say that once Allman was gone, everything would be hers, and she would be the one to drive him out. Only she could kill him and claim all. Well, she'd think about it later, as it seemed like a risky but viable option. Stepping off the stool, she clicked open the battery compartment of the camera and bent down to select a few replacements. To her horror, there were no old batteries in the compartment. There was nothing. It was empty. That meant someone must have deliberately taken them out, but no employee would have done that. She looked up again, and this time the inmates were growling suspiciously loudly. She walked a few steps further into the center of the chamber, where they stared at her intently. It was then that she noticed each of the inmates' cell locks were positioned at a slightly strange angle. She couldn't help seeing it because it seemed odd. It was as if the lock pads had been turned upside down. And then she realized that they had been broken. The inmates' growling rose in volume. Suddenly one of them jumped out of his cell, prompting the others to escape too. They launched themselves into the center of the room, snarling and breathing heavily, crawling on all fours like wild beasts. Each opened his mouth wide open, and spit dribbled from their chins. Then they started advancing slowly towards her. "Security! Security!" she shrieked, watching their hungry eyes glowing in anticipation. They attacked her and she screamed. The camera fell out of her hands and onto the floor, shattering into many pieces. The inmates mauled her and ripped at her flesh with their teeth, chewing off chunks of her face and arms. She flailed around madly in pain, and they continued to crawl around her and bite into her limbs. "Help me!" Her screams were muffled. 5 guards dashed into the chamber, followed by Allman and the bald scientist. Blood covered everything in sight, and even the brightest parts of Gates' white coat had been stained a painful shade of pink. Security dragged the inmates off of her, throwing them back into their cells. They tried to jump back out, but they were tranquilized, and soon all 3 of them fell into a deep sleep. She felt herself being lifted into a stretcher and carried away. The last thing she saw before she passed out was her left hand, which was now no more than a gloopy red mass of flesh, skin, and bone. Orman shook his head, gazing disappointedly at the blood splatters in the middle of the room. "What a shame. The HQ really does need to order some new locks, doesn't it, Jackson?" The bald scientist eyed him suspiciously. "Well, you seem calm, boss." "Well, one does need to be calm in situations like this. It's the only way you can get through life, you know. They don't call me headquarters boss for nothing." He walked over to the pile of batteries and the shattered pieces of camera. He picked up 2 of the plastic pieces, which he fit together like a puzzle. "Shame," he said again, turning it over and looking at the battery compartment. "These things cost a fortune." He smiled, gazing down into the empty slots from which he had removed the batteries. Awoken. She opened her eyes again. She sat up to examine her surroundings and saw that spots of blood had stained her pillow. Her wounds didn't seem to hurt much, so she lifted the covers off herself. She was wearing a light blue patient gown, and her limbs and face were wrapped in bandages. She unwrapped her facial bandages slightly and dragged her fingers across her face. She was delighted that she felt only 2 stitches, one down her left cheek and one in front of her ear. Well, at least the attack hadn't damaged her face too much. But her left hand was still a mess, and underneath the bandages she could see that the top part of her thumb was missing. She felt a sharp pain in her shoulder, forcing her to lie back down. A nurse entered the room, bringing her a cup of coffee and some biscuits. "Ah, Gates, you're awake. Do you remember what happened to you before you came here?" The door opened again, and Max Bridges stepped in. She groaned silently to herself. He had a sly grin on his face, and his hands were behind his back. As he walked closer to the bed, he took them out, revealing a bunch of flowers wrapped in pink plastic paper. "How are you, babe?" "Oh, that's sweet," she smiled, as he placed the flowers on the table beside her bed. He placed an unopened card on top of them, which read, "Get well soon," on the front in large pink letters, above a picture of a teddy. "Now, can I have a kiss?" "Bridges." She sat up and pecked him on the lips. "Gates and Bridges," sighed the nurse. "My perfect town has gates and bridges." "Psh, corny puns," mouthed Gates. "I'll leave you 2 to it." The nurse then went out of the room. "Now, would you mind telling me what the hell happened to you?" "I can kind of remember it, but not too clearly," she began. "I was going to change the batteries on the security camera in the place where I kept the test subjects." She paused. She wasn't sure whether she should tell him what had happened next in her mind as of yet. No, she would skip that part. "Hmm?" He nodded. "I thought it was weird because broken cameras usually give the computer an alert telling you to replace the batteries. and nobody had known about this for ages until I asked about it. But then I found out the batteries weren't broken. There were no batteries. Someone had taken the batteries out, and the CCTV images didn't get through to Jackson. I don't blame him, because that's why he forgot to feed the test subjects. Yeah, I was thinking the cables were quite stable here. Even if one broke, it would send an alert message. But not if someone deliberately took them out. He paused and thought for a few seconds. I swear I saw Ullman go in there once. He was by himself as well, and... What? A security guard always has to accompany a boss into the chamber. I mean, that's the rules. Yeah, exactly. That's why I thought it was strange, but well, it was nothing really. Well, it's something now, she laughed. It's something serious. I always knew it. Ullman was the one who took the batteries out. Hey, don't jump to conclusions. Don't question it. No, it was him. He planned it all, and he knew this shit would happen. She lowered her voice then. He knew Jackson would forget to feed them. Jackson was monitoring the security pictures. Well, he's old and a bit ditzy. If he didn't see the picture, he wouldn't question it. Ullman knew that I'd be the one next to go in there. That's why he loosened the locks on the cells, and they were able to jump out and attack me. Well, that's a sensible conclusion, I guess. Well, what then? Do you think all three of the inmates could have broken the locks themselves, taken the batteries out of the camera, and then had the sanity to hide back in the cells just to jump out at the last minute to bite me? Who else would have done it? Who else hates me as much as Ullman does? Yeah, okay, makes sense. But what do you want to do about that now? I honestly don't know. They looked at each other, their faces more tense than before. The door opened and Ullman came into the room. She was surprised to see Bridges stand up and leave the room abruptly. Miss Gates, how's it been? He almost jeered at her. Anger boiled up inside her, and she felt like she wanted to knock his teeth out right there and then. But she resisted, keeping her face totally calm and professional. I appreciate your concern, Ullman. I've been well, thanks. The recovery's been slow, but I've been... well. He took out a small box of chocolates from his briefcase and put them onto the table, but no get-well card followed. Thank you. She smiled. I'm very grateful for all this, but it's really not needed. Oh, I see someone's already beat me to it, he said, looking at the flowers Bridges had given her. Who's it from? Before she could stop him, he opened the cards. Great, now Ullman knew about their relationship. He was bound to degrade Bridges too. She just hoped he wouldn't hate her for it. Who's BS? Bridges hadn't signed it with his full name, not even his initials. She sighed in relief, reminding herself that he was smarter than he looked. That's my friend Beatrice Smith, she said, quickly making up a random name. She's working for the IS department in the Philippines. It was quite nice to receive her mail. Really? Never heard of her. And did she mail the flowers to you too? They look a bit too alive for that. She clenched her fists. No, those were from the emergency department. Bullshit. What? A bead of sweat rolled down her forehead. His eyes seemed too narrow for safety. He laughed. I mean, the BS must stand for bullshit. Flowers are pretty bullshit too. I mean, look at them. They're cheap. All these people have absolutely no idea how to buy gifts. I'll have to discipline my emergency department better next time. Of course, God forbid there ever is a next time. He wore a jolly smile on his face. She swallowed and her pulse relaxed. Thanks for the chocolates, Ullman. Really isn't necessary, but thank you so much. I'll enjoy them. He picked up his briefcase and walked towards the door, then turned back around. Oh, you will, won't you? They're professional quality. And then he disappeared. Irate, she gritted her teeth and sliced the cardboard box open with her sharp red fingernails. Her conclusion seemed to make sense. This was a man who'd planned to kill her, in fear of his position being stolen. Now there was an obvious sense of conflict between them. She knew the fight to become headquarters boss had begun. She wasn't going to lose to him. She picked up a finger-shaped chocolate and cracked it open. There was a strange yellow paste inside it, which smelled odd. She licked it and spluttered because it tasted slightly bitter. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized he tried to do it once more, and noted the fact that he hadn't attached a card, so she couldn't frame him for murder. She swept her arm across the front of the table, shoving the whole box and its contents into the bin. The sign. Gates sat in the experiment chamber, all alone. In front of her was the first lethal creation of Harvey Seiden, the deadly angel's wings. She stood up, then walked over to it. Her high heels created loud, echoing footsteps which filled the entire chamber as she walked. She ran a finger down the undersides of the two flat iron bars which met in the middle, where the subject's chest would be. The sharp iron spikes pierced her skin, and she licked the blood away. "Hello, Gates." A familiar but unknown voice called her name. She turned around, but nobody was there. Oh no, not the voices again. Who the fuck is this? Do you remember me? She recoiled in shock. Harvey Jack Seiden stood behind her, on the other side of the angel's wings. "Seiden," she shouted. "How are you? I thought you were dead." "Yes, I'm afraid I was too, but I came back to warn you." "Warn me? About what?" "By replacing me, you're walking into a deadly trap." Before she could move, she found herself entrapped between hollow metal bars, the angel's wings. How had she ended up in there? She didn't even remember herself getting up. Struggling to free herself, she resisted the iron bars. Suddenly, Seiden lowered the spikes, and she screamed as they dug into her body. Blood oozed out onto her white coat and dripped down her legs. Just then she saw Seiden's hand on the lever. "No, don't do it. Have mercy," she shrieked with all her might. "Seiden, I used to work for you. You're the original, I'm the replacement. You're the real one, I'm the fake one. Just don't do it, please. Don't do it." He ignored her desperate pleas and pulled it down. The machine began to work, ripping her torso open from the middle. The pain was unbearable, and she screamed even more loudly. "Gates, this is what will happen if you continue to sit idly and watch. You will die," said Seiden, holding a calm look on his face as he usually had when he was alive. "It's either you or him. You've seen him try to do it twice already. You've got to do it. Save yourself while you can. You can get everything. Just kill him. You know you want to do it. You know it." It was telling her to do it again. The voices had returned. She pushed against her restraints, trying to cover her ears. She recognized that familiar line. It wasn't the real Seiden talking to her. She was just imagining the whole thing. Relieved, she realized she wasn't really going to die, and the pain stopped abruptly. She woke up, dazed in a cold sweat. The vivid image of the angel's wings was so real it was hard to believe it had just been a dream. But no, it wasn't just a dream. It was telling her something. Altman was paranoid of her stealing his title, and he'd stop at nothing to get rid of her. She'd originally wanted to wait a little longer before doing it. Now it had become clear that only one of them could be boss, and the other one would end up dead. This dream was a sign. She had to take action quickly before it was too late. Sitting up, she grabbed her cell phone from the desk and tapped in a number. "Bridges, which wing are you in?" "Is this Gates? Geez, it's early. You finally want to hook up." "Bridges, I have no time for chit-chat. It's 2 a.m, so there shouldn't be security outside your wing." She looked out of the window. "The coast is clear, too. Can you meet me in room SP56 in 5 minutes?" "For what?" "I've got serious business to talk about." "Sure thing, babe. SP56, is that right?" "Yes, and be careful." The pact. The dim light flickered intermittently. What the hell is this all about, Gates? I just had a dream. In the dream, Sidon came back and told me I had to get rid of him or else I'd die. Just listen to what I'm saying. It's either me or Allman. He's trying to kill me. Is he really? Bridges raised an eyebrow. Don't you just want to murder him so you can become the headquarters boss? Well, he spoke the truth, though. She couldn't admit that. No, I'm saying he's overly obsessed with getting kicked out by the boss. He doesn't want me to replace him like I did with Sidon. That's why he's trying to kill me, like he did back then with the security camera issue. You figured this all out based on a dream? Are you playing with me? No, whether you believe it or not, I heard voices. They told me to do it. They were always there, but then they weren't a minute later. I don't know what's going on, but from what I know, it's certainly time. She looked into his eyes and walked closer to him. Don't you love me, Bridges? Now, it's either me or him. Choose. Of course I love you, honey. But what do you want me to do about it? You idiot, Bridges. I'm asking you to kill him for me. Baby, he began. I know it's hard to understand, but I don't do good work for free. How much are you planning to give me? When he's dead, I'll be your boss. I'll pay you double, no, triple your current salary. That should be enough to satisfy you. Now, think about it. 3 times what you get now. What could you do with all that money? Honey, make it 4, then I'll do it. She frowned. 3's the maximum. Well, then I'm afraid I can't do it. Look, it's either 1 or 3. Which would you prefer? But it's a big risk, you know. I might get caught. His voice was dripping with sarcasm. And she groaned. All right, make it 4. Yeah, that's more like it, babe. How about tomorrow night? After I find some way to get past security, I'll crawl into his room and shoot him with his own gun. No, you can't do that. He keeps his gun in his jacket all the time, even when he's sleeping. Why don't you use your own gun? You science guys still have a lot to learn about hitmanship. The bullets of each gun are unique, so each kill can be identified and, well, the killer rewarded. But in this case, he'll be rewarded with torture and execution, I suppose. Well, I could stab him, then put the knife in his hand. That'd be the easiest way. But then they'd question why he didn't use his gun. It seems overcomplicated. Hey, give me a day to think of something sensible, okay? I'm the bringer of death. I know how to deal with these things. They only call the captain the bringer of death. Wait, you're the hitman captain now. You never told me that. Suddenly his face went pale. What? She asked. What's the matter? He looked at her again, then his natural face returned, the slightly sardonic smile. Yes, I am. Captain Bridges, Deathbringer. Does that make me hotter or creepier? Both, but I like it. I always thought you were just a normal contract killer. You never told me. Looks like I underestimated you. The captain of the hitmen was 3rd in line to headquarters boss, after head researcher. That's good, babe. So, do you trust me with this? Yeah, but you need to be careful. Security's a piece of cake. There's no way they can catch a contract killer. He looked into her eyes and touched her face. How do I know you trust me? What do you mean? I can kiss you again if you like. No, although that would be nice. He looked at her bracelet. It was thin and made of silver and had a pink flower on it. Do you wear that bracelet often? He asked. I always wear it everywhere, along with my watch. Then if you trust me, give it to me. She looked at him strangely. Why are you asking me for... Because only that way I know I can trust you. She took it off and gave it to him. He put it in his pocket and ran a finger down the scar on her cheek. And then he kissed her. And also, he continued, one more thing. I need the head of your next subject. Why's that? Let's just say I don't exactly want him screaming my name out loud before he dies, and in case someone sees me. I don't know where you're going with that, but fine, whatever you want. I'm killing off one tomorrow morning, and I'll deliver it to you before noon. That's good. Be careful, Bridges, she whispered. You too, babe. SB-41. Ormond sat in his cubicle and yawned. 2:34 a.m., read his digital clock. It was time for a nap, although he knew it wouldn't be long before it was time to get to work again. There were too many damn things he needed to do. Being the headquarters boss took effort. He wished he was the real boss, who didn't have to do shit, who could watch the dollars pouring in every second. He chucked his cigarette in the bin and lifted himself off his chair. He flicked the lights off and headed down the hallway to his room, SB-41. Once he'd locked the door, he sat comfortably on his bed and switched on his nightlight, lighting another cigarette. He turned on the television and browsed through the early morning programs. There weren't many interesting ones, so he turned to the news channel. Then he heard a sharp bump behind him. He saw nothing when he turned around, so he dismissed it. Nowhere could be safer than in his own bedroom, where the security camera sitting on his shelf watched everything that happened. Some would say that it's unnerving to feel watched when you're sleeping, but if anything, it made him feel safer. Still, the noise had irritated him, as his room was usually completely silent, and he liked it that way. But something fallen. He shifted towards the other side of his bed, but stopped when he heard quiet shuffling coming from the wardrobe. Well, that was unusual. He leaned over the lamp to open the door. Suddenly, a hand emerged from the wardrobe. He jumped back, however. Before he could get away, someone wearing a grey sweater grabbed him by the neck and then covered his mouth. His muffled scream stopped when he looked upon the face of this ominous being. No, it wasn't human at all. He'd never seen anything like it before, and he was so horrified he couldn't make a sound. Some creature of the night had found him. It had two bulging eyes which protruded from two bloody sockets. They were covered with veins and grew unevenly on its face, the left eye too low, almost on its cheek, and the right too high, sitting on its forehead. Its nose was crooked and too close to its lips, which seemed fleshy and raw. Its mouth was permanently open, revealing a set of human-like teeth, aligned in an unnaturally crooked way. There was blood on its teeth, and in its left hand was a giant blade. The dim yellow nightlight cast disturbing shadows across its face. Where was security? No one was coming to save him from it. This creature, grabbed his hair and threw him onto the floor face first. It swung its hatchet into his head multiple times, then split open his torso. The last thing he felt was the sharp edge begin to rip through his stomach. The blade cut through his bone. Brains, blood, and intestines began to spill out of him and then onto the floor. Although his heart had stopped beating, the fear he'd experienced in his last moments was forever imprinted into his dead eyes. The creature dropped the hatchet and stayed in the room for a few minutes. Then it escaped down the empty hallway. Aftermath. 5 a.m. An alarm sounded and voices could be heard shouting in the hallway. The headquarters boss is dead. Armand's been attacked. Quick, someone get help. Gates yawned and opened her eyes. As soon as she heard it, she snapped back into consciousness and dressed herself, dabbing on her red lipstick and pulling her shiny blonde hair into a tight bun. She didn't bother to brush her teeth. A giant smile spread across her face. It was absolutely brilliant. Her plan had worked, and Ormond was now dead. Everything belonged to her. The whole headquarters, the money, even the posh bedroom was now hers. This was what she'd imagined when she'd first joined the ISS as a low-grade employee. Yvonne Gates, the headquarters boss. If she continued at this rate, she'd soon end up the real boss if he died sometime, but she decided she wasn't going to rush this one. She'd take it easy with him. This was all thanks to Max Bridges. He was the man who'd made all her dreams come true. She really couldn't thank him enough, but the pay rise just wasn't going to happen. She was his boss now. Her life started again here, and anything she'd said before wouldn't count. Furthermore, if he resisted, she could fire him with a snap of her fingers. Well, he still hadn't signed the contract. She ran as best as she could in her high heels down the crowded corridor to room SB41, where hordes of people had gathered. Making her way to the front of the crowd, she peered in through the open door. Her smile faded, and her heart started racing. All she could see was blood and guts and a huge hatchet that had been left at the murder scene. Wait, that wasn't how it was meant to be. The murder was meant to be dressed like a suicide somehow, but this wasn't like that at all. Bridges had said he would have devised some sort of plan, perhaps to get hold of Ormond's bullet somehow, but a hatchet. Well, she needed to talk to Bridges desperately and ask him what was going on. This wasn't what they'd planned at all. She ran back down the hallway and dialed his number on her private cell. "Hey there, this is Max Bridges at your service. I'm busy right now, but you can leave a message." Well, she cursed, hanging up. This wasn't the time. Something was wrong. Suddenly, 2 security guards grabbed her by the arms. What the hell was this? Were they worried for her safety? "Where are you taking me?" she demanded. They ignored her and dragged her further down the hallway. "Let go of me. What do you think you're doing?" "The boss himself has arrived at the murder scene. He ordered us to do this," they replied. "The boss? Why me? Where are you taking me?" she repeated. "The execution chamber." Bringer of death. She arrived in the chamber, greeted by a set of stony faces. Every member of the headquarters branch was gathered here. They stood organized in rank order, and as the boss entered the room, they bowed in unison. Gates, too, was pushed onto her knees before she could speak. She lifted her head and searched the chamber. Nurses, scientists, hitmen. Bridges knelt at the front, and she recognized him even though he was wearing a suit. She tried to catch his gaze, but he continued to look at the floor. "We are here to witness," began the boss, "the first death sentencing of an ISS offender. In our organization, we do not tolerate any misconduct. The murder of a superior is punishable by torture and execution. Yvonne Gates, do you confess to the offense you have committed?" "What? I didn't do anything," she screamed. "Let me go. Boss, it wasn't me. I didn't murder him." "We found this alongside the body." A guard held up a thin, silver bracelet. The pink flower on it was covered with dry blood. It was broken, making it appear as if it had been dropped by mistake. "Everyone who knows Yvonne Gates has verified that this item belongs to her. I don't understand what you were planning, Gates. Didn't you consider the way you conducted that murder was a little obvious?" Well, she panicked. Bridges had taken her trust and deliberately betrayed it. She couldn't believe it, but now she knew all the pieces seemed to fit together perfectly. Why had he chosen to use a hatchet? To blatantly show it was a murder. Furthermore, why had he done that? So he could frame her for doing it. And why had he wanted to frame her? A sudden realization came upon her. Head researcher was always second in line to headquarters boss. The captain of the hitmen was third. That's why he'd broken a sweat when he'd accidentally mentioned it, but she was too dazed to realize anything suspicious. By framing her for killing Ormond, Max Bridges had killed 2 birds with 1 stone. Now he was going to become the headquarters boss. In fact, he had it planned out meticulously carefully from the beginning, as he'd seen his chance coming when she'd first asked him about Ormond's behavior. He'd always been 10 steps ahead of her. She thought she'd been using him to get what she wanted for herself, but it turned out all this time he'd been using her. He had given her a chance, that time where he let his tongue slip when he accidentally mentioned that he was the captain of the hitmen. He'd never told her that. She always thought he was an ordinary contract killer employee until then, and for good reason too. It's the only clue which could have led her to deduce that it wasn't as simple as it seemed, and more people were against her than she thought. But she completely failed to notice it, and she'd pay the ultimate price for that mistake. Her life. "It was Max Bridges," she shrieked. "He set me up. He took my bracelet and put it there. He killed Allman. It wasn't me. It wasn't me." "Boss, I did no such thing." Max Bridges stood up. I'd known Yvonne Gates for some time before this happened, but I had no idea she was going to do something like that. Though there was clearly some tension between her and Boss Allman, so I can't understand why it happened. I was a close acquaintance of Gates, therefore I can also understand to some extent why she wanted to frame me, but I deny having anything to do with Allman's murder. It's a disgrace to the organization of the International Secret Service. Greed pays, doesn't it, Gates? Now, as it stands, you'll be the next headquarters boss when Gates has been executed, because you are the organizer of the contract killing system at the ISS headquarters. Is that right? Yes, that could have been another reason why Gates wished to accuse me of the murder. He lifted his head now and looked straight at her, the corners of his lips curving into a threatening smile. She could never talk them out of it. His words were too smooth, too cunning. She wanted to burn him, to leave him in the pits of hell to die in the worst way imaginable. She hated him even more than Allman. But there was nothing she could do. She should have been smarter and gotten away from him while she still had the chance. After all, he was the bringer of death, and she should have expected no less. She was silent, unable to make a comeback. The boss waved his hands, and the guards carried her further into the experiment chamber, which was now about to become the room in which she would die. She saw herself being carried towards the angel's wings, and she screamed and flailed. "Now, let this be a lesson to you all," said the boss. "The justice system in the ISS is much more efficient. We don't wait decades for a confession. Once the evidence has been collected, the accused is sentenced to death. Gates, prepare yourself well. As you should know, the angel's wings are a torture device invented by your own mentor and previous head researcher, Harvey Jack Seiton. It is one of the slowest, most painful ways to die on the planet." She was going to die in the angel's wings. It was the real thing now. It was no dream. This was reality. "Had you been a legendary genius like Seiton," he continued, "we would have considered keeping you alive a while longer. But you are only a temporary replacement, so don't think too highly of yourself, Gates." They strapped her into the machine as the crowd watched in silence. Jackson pushed the button and the iron nails dug into her flesh. It had been more painful than she'd expected. Jackson remembered how, nearly a year ago, they'd been investigating reports for Seiton side by side, but he'd never expected that he'd ultimately be the one to end her, with Seiton's own invention. He shook his head and sighed, pulling the lever, and the screaming started. The end. Why hadn't the security camera in Allman's room caught a thing? Jackson had been watching it on the very night he died, but all he saw was an empty room. Replaying the tape again, he saw the same thing and just assumed that he hadn't been having much luck with the cameras recently. He'd thought Allman was working a night shift in his cubicle, so there was nobody in SB-41 the whole night. He told himself to be more careful in the future. If he missed something important one day, he could be executed. He removed the tape from the computer. And that's when he noticed the security code was wrong, and it was missing one digit. It was a fake. The camera had been replaced and the contents of the tape edited. That was the reason why it caught nothing, allowing Allman to be killed. He reminded himself to be more careful in the future, as he'd already signed the contract for life. If he'd missed something important one day, he would be executed. Now, of course, swapping the camera was a smart idea. It seemed like Yvonne Gates had been thinking ahead, being the clever woman she was, but a hatchet. There was something wrong with that. she would never make it so obvious, as the boss had mentioned before. Jackson sat in his cubicle with his head in his hands. Max Bridges had recently been appointed new boss of the headquarters, but he couldn't help thinking there had been something fishy with his new promotion. He remembered Gates screaming his name in agony as she died, as if she wanted to use her last moments to keep accusing him of it. As of now, there was nobody with the title head researcher, and it made him glad, for he knew anyone with that title would eventually drive themselves insane. Opposite his cubicle was Max Bridges' room. He spotted something odd inside a large grey box, which had its lid half open. He tried to dismiss it as nothing, but he couldn't help thinking it looked something like human hair. Nobody was around, so he quietly entered the room, approaching the box slowly. He'd seen this box in the room a few days ago, but Bridges had always kept it locked. It seemed like he'd forgotten to do that this time. He lifted the metal lid off the box, and a foul stench made him cough. He held his breath. When he looked down and saw what was inside it, he held in a silent scream. A severed human head, with its eyes gouged out, nose, lips, and teeth removed. The skin had been scraped off its neck, leaving it flesh-coloured. He recognized the bristly brown hair. It was the head of the last test subject. There was something else in the box, too. He moved the head aside and saw a white piece of plastic, shaped like a triangle, with a string joining one end to another loosely, like that of a mask. He lifted it out of the box and turned it over. Suddenly he was overcome with a feeling of nausea. Human skin was glued to the other side of the plastic in patches. The missing eyes from the severed head were glued onto the skin, but asymmetrically. The nose was glued in the middle, and the lips were also glued on, along with the teeth. He noticed two tiny holes, one just above the left eye, which had been glued on very low down, and the other just below the right eye, which had been glued on too high. It was a mask. An absurd creation. Well, he'd known some strange people during his time working for the ISS, but never with a fetish as creepy as that of Bridges. It seemed he enjoyed making artwork from bits of dead bodies. Looking around to check if anyone was there, he swallowed in disgust. Just as he was about to place the mask back in the box, something large and black caught his eye. A security camera. Why was that in here? He lifted it out of the box and pressed the on button. It loaded, meaning it still had battery left. He saw the room label in the bottom right-hand corner. It was SP41. He'd found the original security camera of Orman's room, which had been removed by the killer. But why was it in Bridges' room? Wiping the dust and dry blood off of the tiny display screen, he went to the menu and clicked on the last video on the list. It showed the time as 2:13 and 34 seconds, when it had started filming automatically. His midnight break was from 2 a.m. to 2:30 a.m., when Orman would usually go to bed, so he wouldn't have been watching it then. He skipped the tape to 2:14 and 9 seconds, when he saw the first signs of movement. A suspicious-looking man had entered Orman's room. It was the body of a man, definitely not a woman's figure. The man wore a grey sweater and had his back to the camera. It looked like he was searching for something. A second later, he turned towards the screen, and Jackson nearly dropped the camera in shock. The man's face seemed inhuman and mutilated. His features were twisted and grotesque. The man saw the camera, then quickly advanced towards it. He realized that it wasn't the man's face. No, he was wearing a mask, the same as the mask in the box. The man saw the camera and rushed towards it in the space of around 3 seconds, and the tape ended in static when his face was closest against the camera. He detached the camera, allowing Orman to be murdered later. The mask the man was wearing in the video was the same as the mask in the box. It must have been Max Bridges who detached the camera and murdered Orman. At least, if he hadn't committed the actual murder, then he definitely had something to do with it. The box contained all the evidence that was needed to link him to the murder, and he must have gathered it here, planning to take it out when nobody was looking and possibly burning it. "Ah, Jackson," said a voice behind him. He dropped the camera back into the box and turned around, his heart in his mouth. Bridges walked towards him and closed the door. "Having fun looking through that pile of old rubbish? Oh, I apologize for entering your room without permission, boss." "Fair enough. I understand." Bridges smiled down at him, his eyes narrowing. "But this box is full of evidence which says that you had a part to play in Ormond's murder. Wasn't just Gates." Jackson took a second to cough. "I'll inform you, Max Bridges, that if the boss sees this evidence, it'll be enough to convict you of murder." As soon as it came out of his mouth, he regretted saying it. Now Bridges knew he'd seen the security footage. Well, he wished he could take it back, but it was too late. "And I'll inform you, Jackson, that the execution chamber is right behind you." And so once again, we reach the end of tonight's podcast. My thanks as always to the authors of those wonderful stories, and to you for taking the time to listen. Now, I'd ask one small favor of you. Wherever you get your podcast from, please write a few nice words and leave a 5-star review, as it really helps the podcast. That's it for this week, but I'll be back again same time, same place, and I do so hope you'll join me once more. Until next time, sweet dreams and bye-bye.